They said in the Labour conference before the election, they said we're going to slash consultancy spending by like 60, 70% or whatever it is. They've increased consultancy spending. They've increased consultancy spending as they've been in office because they don't have any policy. The areas where the disability cuts are really going to hit hard, post-industrial communities where people who are living in their 50s, late 50s, early 60s, who can't retire yet, but are permanently disabled in terms of working because they've been doing manual labor their whole lives. Those areas are going to get really hit hard by PIP cuts too. So they've tried to triangulate around what they look at the polling as a median position, and it doesn't actually correlate into how people receive policy. And so they've shat all of their voters through the floor.
How optimistic are you about like Zach Polanski and the Greens?
I'm incredibly optimistic. I mean, the thing that I think that has made me think it's not just a fad and it's not just a social media thing is that most people who I've seen talk about Zach Polanski have talked about it in terms of Labour has left me behind. I need literally anybody else to vote for. And Zach Polanski not only gives me like raising the salience of the Greens as a political party and focusing on the economy is the kind of cut through that we needed to peel off these voters. It's been quite a tumultuous few weeks for politics in this country, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it feels like that just all the time, for me. I just feel like everything's been quite bad in Britain for like all of my adult life. I don't know if you have a similar feeling.
It's the millennial experience, isn't it? And
It-
what's unique about the millennial experience too is that as millennials, we grew up being told to do all of the good stuff: go to school, get good grades, go to university, you'll get a good job in the Blair 90s economy, right? And then that got taken away, and so there's this real kind of feeling of loss associated with that. Zoomers do not have that at all. They have grown up only knowing despair, which is why millennials are very kind of
Interesting.
angry about it all. But Zoomers are very kind of detached and kind of post-ironic about it all. Just realize, there's a great Bo Burnham bit, how like Zoomer humor is so kind of detached because they know the world's burning. They know that nothing really matters anymore because they've never known the positive story that was told to us when we were trying to think about what the future would hold for us pre-2008.
Is that a bad thing politically, do you think? Like because I mean, I would agree with you, except politically, I don't know if millennials or Zoomers are more of a force, right? So if Zoomers are more detached culturally, are they more detached than millennials politically? Is that because what you said made it sound like there's more hope for millennials because we're more angry because we were lied to, whereas the Zoomers haven't been lied to; they've just been told everything's terrible. So, like, is that I don't know. How do you see that, like, generationally for politics?
I don't know. I mean, if you look into the polling numbers, there was a period where it's with the polls to find out now who put up the numbers that they have when they ask the questions to the public about how likely they are to vote. There was a very brief period, about 3, 4, 5 months or so, where the vote for Zoomers, the percentage that said that they would vote for sure, was much higher than millennials. But that's really dropped off recently, and it's not been replicated in the other pollsters now. So it seems that the voting propensity amongst Zoomers and millennials is reasonably similar, although Zoomers are much more left wing than I thought that they would be. Because there was also a period, if you look at like the FT's analysis of voting trends, where millennials were the most left wing cohort and were getting more left wing over time. But since the rise of Zach Polanski, it does seem that we're seeing loads of Zoomers say they're going to vote Green, like 47% in the latest YouGov poll. Although when they've done specific breakdowns of that demographic, it seems that's very much skewing towards women and that men is kind of 50-50, or I guess 33-33-33 between Reform, Labour and the Greens. So it's very up in the air at the moment.
I mean, one thing I've read, and I don't know that much about like, political polling and all that data, so it's good to talk to you about it. But one thing I've heard and seen maybe a couple of polls on is that there's this divide, right? So some Gen Zers are kind of going to the far right and some Gen Zers are going to the far left. And there's also a gender, you mentioned women, right? There's also a gender split there. How true is that in the UK? Do you think that maps onto like Reform and Greens?
I mean, it's certainly not untrue. that there are these splits that exist. But if you compare it, say, to Germany, where young men are breaking incredibly heavily for the AfD, yet in women they're going for Die Linke, the kind of move from the Greens and the SPD to Die Linke. This is not as pronounced in the UK. Whilst young men are much more likely to vote for reform than they are for than young women are
Yeah.
likely to vote for reform. Broadly, if the overall trends, if you group parties by broader left-right affiliation, let's just pretend that Labour are to the part of the left-wing cohort for now, right? Let's just assume that that's how
Yeah.
that works, because people are voting based upon what the party seems to be rather than the actual
Yeah.
reality
Yeah.
of policy. Yeah. Then even amongst young men in this country, they still vote plurality, or I guess majority, because it's 50-50, I guess, still vote majority for parties of the left, quote unquote. So whilst there is a dynamic which shows that young men skew towards reform more, they're still voting for left wing parties overall because the economy is more important than these cultural issues.
Okay. So because the economy is more important than these cultural issues. So you mentioned Germany. Is culture, would you say, is that more dominant in the German case? Is it like they're really
Yeah,
bothered by the culture wars, or is it immigration, or
I think it is mostly immigration, and I guess because the German economy is kind of more normal than ours, our economy is
yeah.
like totally. I mean, your title of your stream is as "How can we save the UK economy?" With
Mm.
great difficulty. I think is probably the answer to that question, because there is so much wrong with it that whilst Germany's not in a great place right now, they haven't been in the really terrible place that we have been, or at least not to the same degree, for the last 15 years or so since 2008.
I mean, the thing about Germany is that it's got some much less inequality, I think, and specifically regional inequality, which I just think is one of the biggest blights of the UK. It's like the fact that, I mean, even I live in London, even within London, you cross a road and you're like, oh shit, I've gone from like the poorest looking area to the richest looking area. But then if you go out to like some seaside towns or something like Blackpool, you're just looking, it's like a different country. Like the average income drops loads, the average life expectancy drops loads. There's just no opportunity. All the high streets are boarded up. There's really high rates of depression, drug use, you know what I mean? And it's like it's just really, really terrible. Whereas in Germany, I'm not saying they have none of that, of course they do, but there is often, owing probably to Germany's strong manufacturing sector, there's reliable employment in a lot of the smaller towns, and so that forms like the economic backbone. Backbone. So I just, it feels like they don't. You're right. They don't quite have these same economic problems as us.
I think that is true to a certain extent. There is a regional inequality between East and West Germany. Like the
Yes.
former East Germany heavily votes for the AfD, whereas the former West Germany heavily votes for the Christian Democrats. So there is some level of regional inequality there. But even if you look at like East Germany, what you also see is very similar to the UK, is that you're seeing these breaks towards far right parties in the kind of the more rural areas or the less kind of city center areas, and yet the city centers in these areas in the East Germany, in the former East Germany, they vote for Die Linke. Like Die Linke are winning in seats in like the center of Berlin and places like that, and in other cities around the country too. They're seeing this urban-rural divide, which I think the urban-rural divide and the generational divide is a really big part of European politics at the moment. Now, the generational divide I think is less pronounced in places like Germany. That's one of the big
Right.
problems in the UK economy, is the generational divide in terms of economic prospects, in terms of who gets gains from things like the welfare state, who gets gains from things such as access to property, which is way worse in the UK than I think most European countries that have had, like I said, normal governments. I think this is what happens when you have proportional representation rather than these majority governments, where we've seen so much generational focus from the economic policy from Conservative and Labour governments towards the older generations, that disparity isn't as bad in the Europe as it is here, which allows these cultural issues to be more salient. Whereas here, there's so little of the economic gains of the last 46
Mm.
years. What little that we've gotten has gone to our generation and below. The we can't not focus on the economy. How can we not focus on the economy when the graduate premiums drop? There's very few jobs. Unemployment is high. We care lots about climate change and what's happening with regards to that. We care about the fact that we're not going to get access to pensions. Like huge amounts of the welfare state go on pensions and pensioners in this country,
Mm.
and yet they still want to strip what little of the welfare state that we have that goes towards people of working age too. So there's this huge generational disparity in this country that doesn't quite exist to that same degree in Europe, in my opinion.
Well, I think here we've got, almost all of our wealth is tied up in housing, isn't it? And it's financial wealth, right? So a lot of it's just like house prices. And that means that, the house prices increasing is a good thing for those who own them, who are disproportionately older, also disproportionately richer, disproportionately whiter, but that just creates this massive divide. And I think that one thing that politicians, and especially the Tories, starting with Thatcher, one thing they've done is just like they've pursued an economy where house prices are rising, and that you'll see some of the only interventions that they make, really like government interventions, are into the housing market and to assist people with like mortgages and things like that. So I do think that you're absolutely right. That's a massive division. Whereas if you look at the Netherlands or Germany, that rental is much more common, but it's much more regulated, and there's things like rent control, there's things like really strong renters rights. I think I read something somewhere about how the average German renter is about as secure as the average UK homeowner with a mortgage, right? Maybe even more so. And so a lot of Germans aren't really that bothered about buying. They're just like, yeah, I just pay for housing and like that's secure, even though I'm renting it. But they're not too worried about having all of their wealth tied up in housing, because they've got like a functioning welfare state and a functioning social system, so they don't have to invest in that specific asset for it to serve as like their insurance and their pension in later life, which I think is how a lot of people are using housing now.
Well, exactly. I mean, the pension system in this country is crazy, where we incentivize people for ages to become landlords as a pension. We did even more insane things like buy to let mortgages to get to let the same generation that got all of the gains from the public sector sell off, that got all of the gains from right to buy as a political policy, which was there to create Tory voters, and that's what it has done.
Yeah.
It's created this kind of housing theory of everything when it comes to the economy. Like you look at times when we've seen a change in government, and it's always come after things that have shocked the housing market. Black Wednesday, 2008, Liz Truss, like those are the three times we've seen big shifts in political polling in terms of who is in government. And it's all come after shocks that have affected the housing market. And that's because we've created this system where the only wealth that regular people have access to is housing. And we've created this asset economy. I mean, Gary Stevenson talks about it a lot, that we've created an asset economy about ever appreciating assets, where either you own like financial instruments or you own housing. And that's the way that you get wealthy in this country, insofar as we have disincentivized so much actual productive investment. I mean, there's a really great stat that Francis Coppola posted showing the if you look from like 2013, I think it is onwards, all of the productivity gains, or at least the increase in productive capacity that we've seen, is because of the increasing size of the labor force and some increase in the value of capital assets. And none of it is multi-factor productivity. It's gone to almost zero in terms of productivity or productive capacity increases since 2013, because no one's investing in anything productive. Why would you, when housing and or financial instruments are an infinite money glitch?
I think that relates to this report which came out about a few years ago. It was by, do you know the economist Joe Michel?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, by him and Rob Calvert and a couple of others as well. And they were looking at like what shifted in the UK economy, and it was really pervert. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I flip between the Tories are just absolute political geniuses and they're complete and utter morons who get really lucky. But like what they did was implemented this massive program of austerity, obviously cuts to public services, stagnant wages, really low investment. But employment didn't suffer really. Employment was actually relatively high over the austerity period, which I think surprised probably even them. I don't think I didn't expect it to happen as a simple sort of Keynesian logic. I thought, oh, well, unemployment will go up if you take that much money out of the economy and out of essential services. But what happened, and I do think they got a bit of a boost from like the USA. What happened was this rise of like insecure sort of flexible work, right? So you're thinking of your Uber drivers, your delivery drivers, that kind of thing. And you saw a massive growth in this. and that sort of absorbed all the workers, and so people did have jobs, and still to this day it's still an issue, but they're not stable jobs, they're not particularly well paid jobs. And also, they to what you said about multi-factor productivity, they're not productive jobs, in the sense that they're not, it's not like investing in either public services or infrastructure or something, or like computing or manufacturing or anything like that. You're not going to get productivity gains really for like an Uber driver or a Deliveroo driver. So that's one theory I've seen for like this. People call it the productivity paradox, don't they? In the UK, like, why has productivity just completely flatlined? I think it may well be, at least according to this report by Joe Michelle and co. It's like people have just shifted into those jobs that don't really make any progress.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I think that's right. And the loads of the things that people will attribute to a whole facet of issues in terms of why people feel so much poorer right now, and why in lots of cases they are so much poorer, is
Mm,
because the Conservative Party and to a lesser extent the Labour Party, especially under New Labour, just continue doing supply side labour market policy for, again, 46 years. It is, how do we reduce the bargaining power of workers so much and so hard? And it's reduced unemployment, as you say, but it's made people poorer, made work less, but with less productive and also less stable. It's the kind of the rise of the gig economy has benefited loads of shareholders and benefited basically nobody else, whilst also being politically beneficial for a Conservative Party that don't have to care about the vote, or didn't have at that point to care about the votes of working people, because there's this giant generational cohort of retired people that they can just keep pumping state money into via the triple lock or whatever it is, or winter fuel allowance, to keep them reliably voting Tory, until, of course, the whole migration thing happened. And now that reliable cohort of Tory voters have all shifted to reform. They've not spent any time trying to invest in young people, at least not working class or middle class young people, because all of their policies that stimulate demand in the housing market, all of these help to buy things, only help you get access to the deposit you need for a house,
mm,
don't bring mortgage rates down, they don't make salaries high enough that you can get on to, or you can qualify for a good mortgage, unless you're part of this kind of high skilled or nepo baby demographic of upper middle class Tory voters. And so if you look at the polls, the Tories are in fifth place. They were in fifth place at the election amongst the under 40s in this country. And I think it's in the under 50s now. If you look at polling, they're in fifth place, behind even the Liberal Democrats. Like, so they have done all of they have, as you say, been like stupid but also politically genius in a way that they created this giant loyal voting cohort, which was a big cohort as well, because it's the baby boomer generation where birth rates were very high, which they're now very, very low. And they have done nothing to incubate the future generation of Conservative voters, which is why this
mm.
existential problem for the Conservatives going into the last election is only getting worse, right? You'd have thought worst election ever for the big party of UK politics. It's won more elections than any political party in the history of humanity. You'd think that they would be able to bounce back. And it's only getting worse now because, well, the older voters realise all we care about is migration, even though we don't care if that's going to be able to pay our pension later or not. And so they've abandoned the Tories over these cultural issues because broadly their economy is better, at least for the Conservative voting older voters. The poorer ones tend to be voting Reform or Labour. And for younger people, they've been given nothing for 46 years by the Tories, or at least the last 15 years. So they've not voted, they're not voting Tory either.
So,
So there's just
so
like
can
nothing left for them.
can I just like highlight this, because I feel like what you're saying cuts across quite a conventional narrative that you hear about hostility to immigration, because the very usual kind of crude rule of thumb 1930s idea is you get a big recession, bunch of people get pissed off, hostility to various minorities, immigrants, trans people, or that increases as a result of economic hardship. I feel like what you're saying is actually the opposite. I feel like you're saying the economically comfortable people are actually the ones who are more bothered by immigration.
I mean, if you look at the polling, like the
Yeah.
biggest concern, as far as all British people are concerned, is the cost of living crisis. The economy has ranked as the highest concern for voters for the last 5 years, and it's not even. As immigration has ticked up, it's still not knocked off its pedestal. But if you look at the age demographics, right, the salience of immigration is way higher amongst older voters than it is amongst younger voters. And in fact, the younger voters are far more like the Zoomer demographic, which is statistically the poorest demographic in this country. If you compare the access to non-housing expenditure between Zoomers and Boomers way outstrip Zoomers. Actually, the first time in history where the like 18 to 30 demographic has had less consumptive power than the over 65s. The Lord David Willits has a really good lecture about this, where he talks about consumptive power. And so it looks to me, at least in terms of correlation, the generations that are more likely to be economically well off have got the time to care about migration. And whilst there's certainly a salience of this issue amongst poorer people in this country, like I'm not saying that people who are poorer don't care about immigration, because clearly they do. There's this sense of unfairness about asylum seekers getting things that poorer people don't. The level to which that I think that it dictates how people vote is much more salient amongst older people than it is amongst younger people, or the more affluent than the less affluent.
I mean, another thing which might relate to that and it might support it, I'm not 100% sure, but is it not the case that the hostility to immigration does come from areas where immigration is actually quite low in the UK? Like you're talking about these kind of, yeah, rural Tory now reform areas, like where people kind of live in these relatively small towns and they've got like they own their homes and things like that. Whereas where immigration is quite high is the cities, and obviously cities are usually much more progressive. So it's kind of, I mean, that is one of those things that makes me think. And I know a lot of people in chat might be like, "This doesn't need proving," but it makes me think. It's very manufactured because if it's not like people's lived experience. It's not like they're saying, "No, immigration is here. It's at my doorstep. I can see it actually causing problems." It's like, no, there is no immigration where you live. Like you don't have economic problems. You're literally just, I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
Like you're just
yeah.
being brainwashed. You're bigoted. Whatever.
Well, it's why the Tories keep talking about how terrible London is. Not because they're trying to unseat Sadiq Khan. It's because they want everyone who lives outside of London to fear becoming like London. And what I will say, I will caveat my previous
Yeah.
statement here, which is that one thing that you do see a correlation between is that areas with way lower council funding, with worse local economies, tend to have a higher salience of the migration issue. And so while personal wealth might be high in these constituencies, while they might have access to loads of pension provision and high levels of home ownership, because there's this big demographic shift that's been really impactful politically in this country, where young people live in cities, older people live in like rural or a kind of ex-market town or ex-industrial towns where all the young people have left because the service economy has incentivized people to move to cities because that's where all the service economy jobs are, because Thatcher took all the industrial policy funding away from industrial towns. So that means that younger, more progressive voters have all concentrated in areas where immigrants are. That's all a bunch of stuff. But one thing that you do see that really is a kind of a level of deprivation that's different from personal wealth is that local councils are way better funded if you live in a city, way better funded if you live in a kind of a rural, like kind of posh area. But if you live in a like an ex-industrial town, ex-market town, an Accrington, a Redcar, or wherever it is, your council has been decimated in terms of funding. And not just because block grants have been reduced by the Conservative government, they've been, or by the Tories under George Osborne, they've been reduced even more as a percentage of their original funding pre 2010 than they have in those urban areas too. I mean, Rishi Sunak boasted about it, saying we took money away from deprived urban areas and we put it into Royal
Yeah.
Tunbridge Wells or whatever it is. And because business rates fund local councils as well, and young people are moving out of these areas because they're moving into cities, business rates have also gone down as an income stream for these councils too. And £15 billion of council assets were bought by private companies and sold off by the Oswald administration and Philip Hammond when he was chancellor as well in that austerity period. So I used to date a girl who lived in Whitehaven, which is, people don't know, it's in the coast in Cumbria, like, and you walk down the
Yeah.
high street, it's betting shops and pubs, and everything else is closed. That's all that's left, and there's barely any young people left at all. Because if you live in Wakefield, you work at Sellafield, or you're retired. That's it. And they may have loads of personal wealth. They may have mortgages. They may be home owners. They may have a reasonable pension and a good state pension or whatever it is. But if you look around your local area, as you say, where the shops are boarded up and there's nothing left, and council cuts have stripped away, it's you only get your bins collected whenever once every 2 weeks or whatever it is, then you're going to be angry, even if you're personally reasonably well off.
I think one thing that concerns me about the Keir Starmer approach is that I would guess that his approach to that problem, you said, rundown high streets, lack of employment, etc., loads of betting shops in these poorer rundown areas. I would suggest that his approach would be something like regulating betting and banning certain types of betting. Do you see what I mean? Because he will do that. Like he has done a few things like that, and it's like he's introduced maybe a few tenants' rights and stuff. But I just think, without the background of actually rejuvenating the country, it's going to do a bit of good. I'm not against it. Don't get me wrong. That some of these betting companies can get fucked, but you know what I mean. He's not going to address it. So if it's not betting, it might be something else, right? Because these areas are going to continue to be run down, and these big economic problems are going to continue to be there.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's right. And one thing that I think is really necessary to fix a bunch of these kind of big myriad problems is a proper industrial policy. And whilst Ed
Mm,
Miliband really wants a proper industrial policy, Rachel Reeves has control of the purse strings, and she says no. Don't even know about the story. But to remember in the run up to the election, Labour had this big plan for £28 billion a year of industrial policy funding for GB Energy and publicly owned electricity company, right? And then in the run up to the election, they slashed the funding and said, well, actually, we're standing down this commitment. It's going to be a quarter of this. And then they changed their policy
yeah,
documentation. It was going to be 25% funded from the public sector and 75% of it coming from the private sector. And they were going to create these public private partnerships, right? Like, ostensibly because they'd read the back of Mission Economy by Mariana Mazzucato, thought, well, I've read the blurb, don't need to read the rest of the book. So they've created some missions, they've done some public private partnerships. And I think that's good enough rather than actually understanding the meat of what the text actually was
it's
supposed to say internally
so
within the book,
funny.
right? But the reason why they did that, like they told the public it was because the economy was terrible because of the Tories. They briefed the press, it was because they didn't want the Tories to attack them as spending too much and having to raise taxes. The reality, which was leaked by The Guardian, is that Rachel Reeves bumped into some green finance guru person who worked for some like green investment firm or whatever at Davos when she went to the World Economic Forum meeting up there in Switzerland. And she was like, why are you doing all this public funding? No, the private sector will fund it for you. You should change it so that the private sector are more involved. And she did it. And then she appointed that person to the board of the National Wealth Fund project that she was doing, and also involved her previous employer, which was Barclays Bank as well. So the problem is that whilst Ed Miliband certainly wants to do good industrial policy, when it came down to like brass tacks of it, because they didn't want to raise taxes, it was in the manifesto commitment that they were going to strip back 75% of taxes were not going up, which was income tax, um, national insurance contributions from working people, and VAT. 75% of all taxes not changing. So they were constrained based upon their fiscal rules on how much they could do investment based upon how much they would be predicting to have to pay in debt interest payments over the course of that period. And so they were like, well, we can't do that anymore. So we're going to have to get the private sector involved. They've said they're going to invest, right? And so they're crossing their fingers, hoping they'll get this private sector investment. And in the planning regulations will mean the private developers will build more houses, we'll get more green energy. Has that happened? No, it's not happened. And so they're sitting here with growth at like 0.1% for the last quarter, a bunch of their industrial funding kind of at a standstill. And they're wondering why the economy is faltering and people in these areas that need regeneration that aren't getting it are upset with them, you know?
It is amazing, and the Mariana Mazzucato thing is quite funny because obviously, if you have even a passing familiarity with her work, you know that it's about state investment, right? It is, and she's written like 4 books, all of which kind of are along the same theme, including the hollowing out of the consulting con, which is about the hollowing out of the state and state expertise and the transfer of those experts over to private consulting firms who now charge quite a lot for services to governments that aren't usually that good, and they're certainly not oriented around the public good in the same way that they used to be. And yeah, so it's just incredible that you could. I mean, they really must not have read that book. And also the other thing I think, and I'm not sure if you mentioned, I don't think you mentioned this, but sorry if you did, that is the aim of growth. Mariana Mazzucato is like explicitly like not growth. Growth is an amorphous aim. You know what I mean? Say our goal is going to be the economy growing. Okay, everybody kind of wants that, right? All else equal. And like, it's not something you can target. There's a reason the book is called Moonshot. That's because it's about the moon landing, right? That was the project. And various good things flowed from that as a byproduct of it. But you actually have to have a clear program, a clear policy, a clear goal in mind. And you know, if it goes well, then growth may be a byproduct. But it's just they completely misunderstood it, and I didn't realize how ridiculous it was, as quite how ridiculous it was that Rachel Reeves just met that guy and then just like changed their entire plan.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, well, the reality is these people haven't got a fucking clue what they're doing. Like, that's the reality. Is this government is full of clueless idiots just bumbling from day to day, making up policy on the fly, right? Obviously, go back to Marianne Mazzucato. Obviously, you talked about consultancies, like the big excellent book was Rosie Collington as well. People
Yes,
want
yeah.
more information, they can go and watch Unlearning Economics' interview with Rosie Collington, which is incredible and highly recommend listening to it. But they said in the Labour conference before the election, they said we're going to slash consultancy spending by like 60, 70% or whatever it is. They've increased consultancy spending. They've increased consultancy spending as they've been in office because they don't have any policy. You know, and you know why they
Yeah.
don't have any policy? Maurice Glassman basically admitted this on Newsnight the other night, is that they thought they had 10 years in opposition. And since Keir Starmer and the right wing of the party and Morgan McSweeney got control over like the Politburo at the top, they were like, right, we've got 5 years to purge the left. We'll focus on policy later. Let's just spend this 5 years doing trot hunting, which is what it was described internally at Labour HQ, i.e., getting rid of anybody left of like Gerhard Schroeder from development of policy or even being members or MPs within the party. And then this trust happened and they just became a government by accident. The only person who's like done the work of developing policy is Ed Miliband. He does like policy documentation like every week. Things will change and he'll put out another like a draft policy because he knows what he's doing because he has experience of it.
He's a super
Everyone
nerdy
else,
guy, isn't he?
yeah,
He
it's
knows his
true.
shit.
Everyone else is totally clueless, doesn't know what they're doing, have no plans, no like distinct even ideology or beliefs or any kind of reasonable goal about what they want to do. And since they don't know, they're having to subcontract all of this out to consultancies and go, well, we're here by accident. Please tell us what policy will be good for us to do or to not do. And so everything is being done on the fly, right? There's this thing about a child poverty strategy where they were saying, oh, we can't get rid of the two-child benefit cap. That'd be terrible if we did that. Every charity saying, you should do it. It will immediately take loads of children out of poverty, be positive for the economy because it goes into the pockets of high propensity consumers. It will be better in the long run as children are healthier and they become more productive adults, right? Then they went to, we'll do this child poverty review. We'll send it off to this member of the House of Lords, Baroness Casey. She'll do this review for us. She'll come back in 18 months. And then 18 months pass, they go, oh yeah, all the charities were right. We should have done it. I'm like, yes, of course you should have done it. Like, it was obvious from the start. But because you wanted to look right wing and because you had no plans in place before getting elected other than just don't be the Tories, we're the sensible adults in the room, we'll get in and be better than the Tories we promise. And they've done none of this, none of the preparation. It's an absolute shit show.
I mean, spending on children is one of those areas where I think there's a very good case for characterizing it as investment, because there's so much evidence that it pays for itself over the long term, because children are the future and all that. But like, if you're talking about nutrition, like childcare, also for pregnant mums as well, like, then that just has these huge effects across a lifetime of improving like health, education, income, reducing criminality, like everything. It's pretty basic point, but it's just I guess I don't know. You seem more. Are they both evil and stupid? Because that's what I'm getting from you. Like, are
I
they?
mean, what's interesting is I think that a lot of the people who take the most flack, I think, are less bad than others, right? So I've read loads of what Rachel Reeves has written in the past, right? I have become an expert on Rachel Reeves's opinions. I mean, so much so
Including
that
the plagiarized book.
I mean, was very silly, but hence why I managed to quote her own words at her when she was on LBC. I don't know if you've seen this clip. It's how I went viral in the first place. Was I found a quote of her from 2011 going, well, you can't replace public investment with private investment. It won't crowd out private investment. In fact, it will do the opposite. And if we reduce the public realm, it'll only make things worse from what we've seen from 2008. So we should increase taxes on bankers. We should increase taxes on those earning more than 100K. And we should not reduce public investment, as it will mean the investment will dry up everywhere because we don't have a Greece problem. Interest rates are zero. George Osborne is terrible. And so I took all these points to her, said on LBC, you said that, or sorry, an economist has said this. Do you agree with them? And she said, no, I don't agree with that. Well, that's you. You look like an idiot. But I know full well that she thinks what she's doing is stupid. She makes very cogent arguments in favor of lifting the two-child benefit cap when speaking with, I believe, LBC last week or whatever it was. She's constrained for political reasons, from what I can see, by Morgan McSweeney. She's advocated for raising capital gains tax and equalising with income tax before. So whilst I don't think that she's a nice person, I don't think that she's part of the Labour Party that I think have pure intentions. It's clear that people to her right are setting the policy prescriptions and she's having her hands tied with it. So, but there are the evil people that I think are the Glassmans and the McSweeneys, Starmer himself, Pat McFadden, and people like that from the real hard right, the blue Labour within the Labour Party, because they've always had these opinions. And same with like Liz Kendall when she was doing like the disability reforms. Whereas I think, Rachel Reeves is probably like a real social liberal third wayer type who probably doesn't want to be doing what she's being forced to do by the Politburo surrounding Keir Starmer, because he's basically only there in leadership position because he was incubated by this McSweeney faction of the party who ran the Liz Kendall leadership campaign in 2015 and just lied to the membership to get elected. But they are also very stupid too. The people who are in positions in cabinet do not know what they are doing and are allowing consultants to decide what that is for them. So you look at you look at the reshuffle. I think it's been pointed out in your chat was very slapdash. And if you pay attention to Peter Kyle at all, he was previously the science and technology minister. Now he's the business secretary. Doesn't know anything about either of those particular things. And his role as the science secretary was just going, yes, we will do lots of AI. Why? Don't know, but we're going to do it because the Tony Blair Institute has paid us to say it.
Oh my God. I mean, do you think that Britain is, because we talk about the collapse of the Tories, right? But is it the case that Labour are just kind of like they are actually just the Tories? I know it's something people have said for a long time, right? But is it the case that Labour are kind of taking the place of the Tories as let's speak in relative terms here, the centre-right party, and then you've got Reform to the right who are rising. And is it just a big shift to the right?
I mean, that's what it seems to me. I mean, there are reasons that the Labour are left of where the Tories were, especially under Cameron and May. There are kind of different factors when it comes to Boris Johnson. Like Boris Johnson was clearly more reckless in terms of
Yeah.
fiscal expansion, but he had the ability to be because of the macroeconomy and because of the pandemic or whatever it is. And on some social issues, I think Boris Johnson was more progressive than Keir Starmer. Like on trans people, on climate change, they both believed that we wanted a kind of climate revolution, and on migration, like Boris Johnson was very positive about Afghan asylum seekers, was positive about student visas which are being stripped back by Labour, but on workers' rights it was different. But if you look at the comparison between Reeves and Osborne, clearly Reeves is to the left, even though the fiscal rules and this kind of rigid acceptance of whatever the OBR says as gospel, I think are unwise and are causing lots of problems. The issue, of course, is that there are plenty of issues where they're taking the ground of where the Tories used to be. And Tories are moving right, Reform are now an insurgent far right party. I think that is right. I think we are broadly seeing a shift to the right. But I don't think that there's going to be any success for Labour in doing so. That's the
Yeah.
big problem for them, is that you look at the polls, the latest YouGov poll meant that the number of Labour voters who are deserting for the Lib Dems and Reform is combined the same as the number of voters they're losing to the Green Party. So they're just incinerating their own voter base, trying to win over Reform, who are winning voters from mostly non-voters and ex-Tory voters rather than Labour voters. And I don't think they're going to be successful at being able to do that. There's no Keir Starmer base. Like someone from Merlin Strategies was saying this on Channel 4. The base for the Labour Party has just kind of fallen away because they triangulated very specifically to try and win this very efficient election, the Loveless landslide at the last election. And that meant telling their own voters that they were Trotskyists and anti-Semites and student politicians and reckless far left or whatever it is, even with just kind of medium social democrats in terms of policy prescription, and telling everyone on the right that they were correct and they would do all the things that they wanted. And then in reality, in government, they have governed slightly left on the economy than they promised they would have been, but significantly to the right on every social issue that lots of Labour voters care about. And even on the economic policy, where they have moved left in some areas in terms of public spending, in terms of taxation, in terms of where they target taxation and on workers' rights, on things like welfare, they've moved significantly to the right. And that's a really salient issue. And it's a salient issue for right wing voters too. The areas where the disability cuts are really going to hit hard, post industrial communities where people who are living in their 50s, late 50s, early 60s, who can't retire yet, but are permanently disabled in terms of working because they've been doing manual labor their whole lives, those areas are going to get really hit hard by PIP cuts too. So they've tried to triangulate around what they look at the polling as a median position, and it doesn't actually correlate into how people receive policy. And so they've shat all of their voters through the floor. There's no one left to vote for them apart from what is you seem to be like very affluent voters, like the Labour cohort that's left. There's a really great graph from the FT that was put. I was from the Economist, I think it was actually. Sorry, the ratio of the over 70k households versus under 30k households that were voting for each party, the ratio of 70k to 30k is highest amongst the Labour Party, then the Lib Dems, then Tories, then Green, then Reform. So if you're a poorer voter, if from a poorer household, you're more likely to vote Green or Reform. And if you're the richest households in the country, you're more likely to vote Labour, which is an insane prescription if you were telling this to anybody 40 years ago.
That is crazy. Well, you're like a political poll encyclopedia. That is crazy. I like. Do you think that? I mean, do you? There's a few things I want to talk to you about. Actually, I do want to talk about the balanced budget rules in depth. But first, with the Greens, that's the one exception to this whole narrative that we've said, right? And that's like really recent, and I don't know how sustainable it is. I don't know if it's like one of these social media things. I know they've risen in the polls, but we have kind of seen that before with like protest polling, right? And like, how optimistic are you about like Zach Polanski and the Greens?
I'm incredibly optimistic. I mean, the thing that I think that has made me think it's not just a fad and it's not just a social media thing is that most people who I've seen talk about Zach Polanski have talked about it in terms of Labour has left me behind. I need literally anybody else to vote for. And Zach Polanski not only gives me like raising the salience of the Greens as a political party and focusing on the economy is the kind of cut through that we needed to peel off these voters, right? Like when you look at voting cohorts, most people stick around with parties until there's a thing that breaks it, right? Like, for example, you look at the red wall communities that voted Labour for a very long time. They were drifting away up till 2015. Corbyn comes in 2017, does this kind of social democratic industrial policy manifesto, and they broadly come back. Like the reactionary types still stick with the Tories, but the Labour vote that was decreasing in the red wall massively increased in 2017. But in 2019, Labour says we want a second referendum on Brexit. That single issue, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and it collapses. It totally collapses in these kind of like stronghold, anti-Thatcher, ex-mining communities or whatever it is, because Brexit to them signals free trade, end of protectionism, end of industrial policy, the beginning of the service economy in the UK, and all of the jobs in their area going away. Now, the pro-EU people were never going to do the things to arrest the momentum of that dynamic. But regardless, that's how they perceived it. And so Labour deciding to U-turn on their acceptance of the referendum was the straw that broke the camel's back. We saw it with Muslim communities and the kind of geopolitical internationalists at the last election. Keir Starmer says Israel has the right to commit war crimes, has the right to do
Mm.
genocide, and Muslim communities and internationalists abandon Labour Party in their droves. They absolutely kind of they're vote craters amongst the Labour Party. And you look at in rich Tory areas or mortgage holders, consistent Tory voters, Liz Truss happens, bang, falls off a cliff. Right. So you don't really see these big shifts without one specific thing or one moment causing that fracturing, and then it's really difficult to recover. And I think we're seeing that fracturing now with, I think the disability cuts, the real big thing that have harmed the Labour Party with their kind of their loyal voting cohorts, especially amongst younger people. and the Greens have called it out, and I don't think they're coming back. Like, I don't think that as a quote unquote Labour Party, one thing that Harold Wilson described as a a moral mission or it's nothing, right? A moral crusade, sorry. Seeing them go, we want to put hundreds of thousands of disabled people into poverty deliberately. And people looked at that and went, this is disgusting. This is monstrous. How can we support this? And they've moved to the Green Party. We have won those people's votes with a positive message of making hope normal again. And I don't think they're going to come back unless Labour pulls something incredibly magical out of that or become a social democratic party overnight. And they don't seem to want to do that. In fact, they seem to want to do the total opposite. I don't think that. I think that the green surge is continuing, and it's creating members too. This isn't
Mm,
just ephemeral in terms of voting intention right now. This has
mm,
seen a huge upsurge in Green membership. We're bigger than the Tories now in terms of the national membership of the Green Party. We're the third biggest party in terms of membership. So that means people are politically engaged rather than just tangentially engaged in what we're doing. And that's a huge new cohort of canvassers and political campaigners for the locals next year, for the general in 4 years' time. And we saw at the last local elections, right, Reform were creeping up in the polls and then they won, I think, the most council seats by like 4 times at those locals in last May because there was loads of Tory council defences. Like the Tories lost every council that they were defending at the locals last year. And that gave people the impetus to say, well, Reform aren't a protest party anymore. They're winning. We don't like voting. People don't like voting for people who aren't going to win. But they think Reform can win now. And that shot them. That was when the real kind of breaking point that put them miles ahead in the polls. Whereas with the Greens, we've not had that moment yet. People are really considering us as a party because they're fed up of Labour. But until it looks like we can win consistently, I don't think we'll see that big jump in the polls that puts us ahead of Labour kind of consistently. But next year, big Labour defences, and not just for the Greens either in England, which I think we can do really well at in London, in Manchester, and places like that, in Bristol, but also in Wales and Scotland, where Labour will lose Holyrood to the SNP even bigger. Like the SNP look like they're going to get an outright majority in Holyrood because the unionist vote is split on constituency votes, so they'll get back into majority. But
mm.
also, Plaid Cymru are probably going to be the biggest party in Wales as the Labour vote collapses there too. So you'll look at the voting intention polls. The SNP will see their vote increase because people think they're going to win again. The Plaid Cymru vote will increase because people think that they can win now that they're the biggest party in the Senedd. And the same will happen with the Greens in England if we win a whole swathe of council seats. If, of course, if we get the people out on the ground to campaign.
You know, even in the 2024 election in my district, the Green candidate actually made some gains. I mean, I'm in a Labour safe seat, but the shift was quite big, and that was pre the current swell of support for the Greens, and I voted for him as well. But I just remember being, I think he gained like 15 percentage points or something. And that didn't, you know, it was still a pretty big margin for the Labour candidate winning. But I do find that quite encouraging. It does seem like enough people are kind of shifting over to the Greens, and that surely can only grow because, I mean, I think Zach Polanski's been absolutely fantastic. Like you said, it's nice to have somebody just like stand up for like good things. You know, it's just like for once, instead of just fucking either being a complete monster and throwing people under the bus or just equivocating and, you know, not really answering and doing a bit of a starmer where it doesn't really say much. It's just like nice for him to, you know, everything from like immigration to disability benefits to trans people, all of that stuff. He's just like unequivocal, and it's yeah. I guess there are a lot of people who find that refreshing. And you know, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, millennials and Gen Z, he's obviously done very well on social media, and I think like that support, if he can turn that kind of detachment and apathy into actual votes and like political action, then maybe we could see some, you know, a serious shift in British politics.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the latest YouGov polls, the last 3 YouGov polls in a row, have had the Greens winning a plurality with the under 50s. Under 50s plurality voting Greens. I would never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. Like
Mm,
this is the real kind of vibe shift, especially amongst Zoomers and millennials in terms of the propensity to vote Green. So that'll be interesting. And I mean, you say that there was a big shift and increase in the Green vote in your safe Labour seat. I mean, one thing that I think I was very critical of our campaign at the last election is that we focused really heavily. We have a thing called in the Green Party called Target to Win, where we will pick out certain areas and very heavily concentrate our campaigning on them. But those seats that we targeted, we won by like country miles, especially Brighton, especially in Bristol, whereas with Waveney and Herefordshire was probably right the way we campaigned. But we saw 10, 15, 20% increase in the vote share in some seats in London, some seats in Bristol, the next door seat in Brighton. If we had spread our campaigning a little bit further afield and spoke to more voters on doorsteps in those surrounding constituencies, we could have won 6, 7, maybe 8 seats of the last election because people were very happy to vote Green, even with our kind of very boring leadership. I'm sorry, Carl, I love you, but you're not Zach Polanski in terms of cut through. And our terrible social media. Sorry, Molly Scott Cato, but you are rubbish at social media. And now that we've really upped our game on this stuff, those people who were considering voting for us last time are now fully behind us. And I think that that dynamic, given the amount of people we're going to get being able to canvass at the local elections, I think we'll see that dynamic continue. And I hope to God that it does, because if you've seen Labour Party socials, they're all so terrible apart from Ed Miliband.
Is this something you can see yourself doing, running in politics under
No,
the Green
no, I've sent
banner?
too many needs to do that. Um,
You've
no,
done
but
you've
I
done
mean,
what, sorry? You sent too
I
many
sent too
nudes
many.
to do
Needs.
that.
No,
Me too.
I also do. I just would never ever want to run for office as a trans person. I would never want to do that. I would be miserable for my mental health.
That's completely
Um,
fair. Yeah.
but what I will be doing, I will be canvassing. I will be getting out and trying to get people out campaigning. Like, I don't want to be the kind of streamer political commentator who turns politics into content rather than action. So I'm going to try and mobilize as many people as I can to get involved, to canvass for the Green Party and join like the group that we have inside the Green Party called Greens Organized, which focus on kind of eco-socialism as a policy prospectus, as of like it was Greens Organized that proposed the abolish landlords motion at our conference that passed. So
Mm.
we're a big growing movement inside the party to push socialist policy and make the party kind of a party of kind of not radical economics necessarily, because I don't think any of the things we're saying is necessarily that radical in the history of British politics, but certainly radical in terms of where our economy is at the moment.
So you just mentioned the abolish landlords policy. Can I play skeptical centrist for a second?
Go
I
ahead.
have a lot of friends who just don't understand what that means. Because like you say abolish landlords and they're just like, well, what do you do then? Like, so how do you kind of communicate that idea to like somebody who's just thinks it sounds really wacky and it just completely conflicts, even if they hate their landlord, which is a lot of people, it just completely conflicts with their idea of how the world works.
I mean, essentially, it's returning to the housing prospectus pre 1979. I mean,
Okay.
it's really no more radical than that. I mean, in the speech that he gave, Alexander Salins, who proposed the motion at the conference, he pointed out how even the radical Marxists at the heart of Tory economic policy at the time basically admitted that the private rental sector was totally dead. It made up like 4% or something of the overall housing inventory in this country was the private rented sector, because
Mm.
council housing was abundant and plentiful and cheap and high quality in this country, because we'd spent decades and decades and decades with Tory and Labour governments building council housing. I mean, the biggest builder of council housing is still Harold Macmillan, the Tory housing secretary under Churchill, or under Heath. Sorry, I'm under Eden. I forget which one it was, but either way, we we built loads of council housing. We disincentivized landlordism. There was a kind of public shaming of landlordism. It was that you were a bad person if you're a landlord. That culturally back then it was demonized, as Mick Lynch was pointing out in his Downstream interview. And the simplest way of explaining it is we want to go back to what it was like before housing became a commodity to be traded and to be invested and to be speculated on. Our policy proposals about how that looks is investing in council housing, ending right to buy mortgages, extending right to buy. Rental mortgages. What are they called? Buy-to-let mortgages.
Yeah.
Extending right to buy to private tenants. The actual policy prescription says that we want to give tenants a discount to do it based on the rent that they've paid to the landlord, which I think is difficult to qualify. But whatever. I mean, if it helps them do that, then we also want to be able to properly regulate landlordism out of existence, transfer ownership to people who are currently tenants or the state, or creating housing cooperatives and providing and facilitating them too. Because the private rented sector can exist. Like, technically, housing cooperatives are the private rented sector. There's just no
Sure.
landlord. You are collective landlords of each other.
Yeah.
It's collective ownership. And having community land trusts and building societies facilitating homes for people rather than for profit is a whole suite of policies that we'll use to try and disincentivize landlordism enough that over time it gets to the point where it becomes a minimal part of how our housing policy works.
Yeah, yeah, very marginal. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's definitely a set of policies that I already advocated, but you're sort of framing it as abolish landlords because that is clearly one of the outcomes. But I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I can say that to my skeptical friends on social housing and housing as a commodity. There is one stat. Have you read that book? It's a bit old now, but Rethinking the Economics of Land and Housing.
I've
Um,
not known.
Okay, it was 10. It's 10 years old now. It's really good, but I think one of the stats was that 1 in 5 people in like the top income bracket used to live in social housing, like around when you were talking about, right, like in the 70s. And it strikes me that like that level of like sort of social cohesion and people who are, at different income levels, maybe different ages, kind of living together. That is something, and we were talking about this at the beginning. That is something that I think has really, really disappeared in the UK. I think people are really segregated on like multiple markers, whether you're talking about like class, race, age, right? And social housing is like one way to bring people together, and I do think that that could be a really positive thing for like, yeah, just politics and general cohesion, as well as obviously the main fact that which is that it provides houses to people who need them.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what you see in like the high quality social housing in Vienna or whatever, like the
Yeah.
Gemeindebauten. That's the dynamic that you still see there to this day. Like, why would if you're a high earning person, why would you not live in a Gemeindebauten flat in Vienna because they're such high quality and so low cost? And it's again, it's taking the kind of the rentierism and the profit incentive out of it and doing things for social utility that has been so successful there and can be successful here again and create the social cohesion in this a less kind of conflicting society. But the problem with Thatcherism is that, as well as economic ideology, it's a socio-political ideology as well. In terms of not only do we treat every commodity like, or every, not only do we treat all the economy as if everything is a commodity to be traded, we treat each other, we treat our interactions as like commodities to be traded. And I think that's been really damaging to the public psyche.
Mm. John the Duncan talks about this quite a lot, doesn't he? If you follow his, I think a lot of his research into like neoliberalism and like atomization, it is literally, and when he says it, I always think of the housing. Like it's like the main thing where I think, okay, that used to be social, and then it was sold off into like individual plots that are like financial investments, and then everyone's kind of interested in their own little plot of land and their own finances, right? And that does just make society much more atomized. And it means that people, whereas they were working together, as say you had a housing co-op or social housing or whatever, you had some control over it and you made decisions together. Now it's just you, right? And your family, and you're like kind of naturally separated from other families and maybe even competing with them. And I think that you're right. It's a super negative thing for like society.
Well, it's created this kind of this stability gap, right? Whereas if you're a mortgage holder in this country, you've got an incredibly stable life, you've got incredibly stable kind of asset that's appreciating in value. And if you live in the private rented sector, you have no stability. You can get, until the Renters' Rights Bill went through, you get kicked out at a moment's notice. You're moving from place to place. I like moved house in my 20s so many times. I've lost count. People get pushed from pillar to post. How are you supposed to build a life, build a family, build connections, build community if the fucking feudal lord who controls whether or not that you get to stay in the same place or not at a moment's notice can force you to up sticks and leave everything behind? Like, how can you raise a kid in this scenario? No wonder young people aren't having any kids nowadays, because how are you supposed to be able to give your kid continuity of life when 6 months after your tenancy ends, you could be forced to move to a different area. They move schools, all their friends change. You don't know whether or not you can afford to be able to provide for them because the rental situation may have changed in that time. It's so damaging to the continuity of society, of the continuity of community. And again, people wonder why we're a more kind of selfish and, as you say, atomized country. Well, yeah, because how are we supposed to get to know our neighbor? I know I'm a homeowner now. I know my neighbors now. We're in the WhatsApp chat.
Yeah.
Never had that before. I've lived in tower
Yeah.
blocks. I've lived in like whole streets where one landlord just owns entire blocks of ex council housing, and I've never known my neighbors before now because I've never had time to know them. I've never had the incentive to get to know them because I never thought I would be around there for very long.
I'd started to have the feeling of being squeezed out of London actually, and it's what you said about moving around resonates with me. I've moved houses, yes, so many times that I can't even remember. But I've lived in 3 different houses in London, and the landlords were terrible at 2 of them. This guy happens to be quite a nice guy, and the rate wasn't particularly high, and he's really helpful. But then interest rates went up, and we had a negotiation with him. And he said, "Look, he's got a variable rate mortgage, right? It's like interest rates went up, our rent went up, and so not just like at the landlord tenant relationship is one aspect of it, but at the macroeconomic level." When inflation is high, we raise interest rates, and there's a cost of living crisis, and then you increase the cost of living. That's the solution for some reason. You squeeze people, right? And it's like I've just noticed. I'm like, man, can I even stay in London? Like, I don't know if I can. And if I move out of London, I'm like, I don't know really, because everywhere around London's like almost as expensive as London as well. So it's just like it's just ridiculous, like having all of your income absorbed by this and like never feeling secure on top of insecure employment as well. You know, it's just all of that like stability that you expected in adult life. You would think you would have a stable job, a stable house, a family, etc. It's just completely disappeared, and our policies just magnify it. They just make it so much worse. And it's because it's well known that interest rates, the primary way they operate is through housing. It's well known that that's like it's making housing more expensive. It relates directly to people's mortgage rates, and I don't know. It just feels like I don't know why. I don't know what the Greens' policy on inflation targeting and independent central banks and all that is. I know it's not the main thing that, for example, Zach Polanski's talking about, but I mean, do you guys have like a policy on that?
Not as far as I'm aware, unfortunately. But yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying there. It's a really kind of screwed up system that we've got that is extra magnified by our over commodified housing sector. I think, yeah, it's a real mess. It's a real mess. As with London, though, I think what's interesting is that one thing, a complaint that you hear from high income Tory types all the time is, there's too much social housing in London. We've got these prime areas in zone 1 and 2 that are taken up by council housing residents, when I, as a high earning member of the city of London, having to commute in, I'm like, well, yeah, otherwise we'd be breaking up communities that have had continuity for ages. There's a reason why people in London are very happy. It's because that community exists where it now doesn't do, in plenty of other areas of the country. And I think that maximum economic flexibility for bankers in the centre of London is not my primary concern when it comes to housing policy.
No, I mean the irony is that if that kind of Tory, ultra Tory version of London came to fruition, and thank God Sadiq Khan's mayor, and it hasn't yet, but if it did, London wouldn't be a very desirable place to be unless you were a financier. Like I wouldn't want to be here if that was just the good thing about London is that like despite everything, there is still quite a lot of diversity, and you're right, there is a fair amount of social housing, and there are areas where you've got like students and you've got like locals, right? And they're not like completely gentrified. And I think there are places that have quite a good balance, and that's why I love London. But that vision is like, do they know what that you're talking about? Just a bunch of bankers everywhere, just just
I
just
mean, yeah,
living
it's like
all the way through zone 1.
I mean, reeling back to where we started the conversation today, like, I don't know if you've seen that there's this consultancy that ranks the best cities in the world or whatever it is. London has come top like every year for the last decade. And it's because it's a beautiful, vibrant place full of the best people, different people, huge kind of melting pot of all different cultures. It's very cohesive despite all of this. People are quite happy in London as well, and there's always something going on. You can always find a gig to go to in London. Sadiq
Mm,
Khan's still very popular. He's not building enough housing. I think that's the big problem
true.
with his governance, right? But you've got good public transport because it's it's municipally owned with TfL. Like, there's so much to love. There's so much to love about London, and the crime rate's going down too. Like, murder rates, it's lowest it's been for a century in London,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just
Despite what
the
everyone says
yeah,
or is being told to think about the crime in London, it
exactly.
is really low.
Like the dystopia goggles the like the rightoids tend to view London with, just like a complete inversion of reality. The cost is the problem, right? The cost is the issue, and that's why I only spend a day a week in London. But it's
Mm.
it's wonderful. I would very much enjoy living in London if I could afford it. I just can't afford it.
I mean, yeah, I barely can really. Have you logged on to like Twitter recently? Do you? I think you are on it, aren't you? You have an account
Oh yeah,
because
yeah.
I one of the
I
things that well, I was just going to say that the videos of like London on there are just I mean I deleted my account, my main account. I've got a burner one in case I just have to go onto it to look at something. But I've got no, I don't follow anyone. I just get Musk and just a bunch of far right accounts. But there's so many videos that are just like, this is London today, and it's just like it's just I don't know, just like there's some rubbish or something, and then everyone's like, oh, it's the Muslims, or it's some videos of some Muslims or some like black people, but they're just not really doing anything. But like they're like, this is London now, and it's like, look how terrible it is, and it's just like that amount of misinformation. Like I just it's incredible because the videos don't even support the caption. You know what I mean? But it doesn't matter because it's just like pure rhetoric, and it just worries me like how much that affects our discourse around what is a pretty safe city.
I mean, there's a political incentive to do so because it's the scare tactic. Like all of the leafy suburbia, all of the country bumpkin rural areas who fear not only more non-white people from coming to their area, the kind of the white flight type discourse that you had in the Americas in the 90s, whatever it is. Well, on top of that, they fear about the the green and pleasant land being concreted over. That's one thing that you hear loads of times. These people who are not. There are plenty of anti-migration people on cultural issues, but also in terms of like there's a conservationist anti-immigrationist vote too, which is like we don't want our area to be paved over for all of this new housing that's what will come like London. It'll just become tower blocks. I'm like, that's not happening. It's
Yeah.
not happening to you. Like 3% of this country has residential housing built up on it. Like 7% built up in total. Like we're not coming to turn your leafy suburbia into Coruscant, I promise.
That is very Nazi-esque. That was the German Volk was the that was like the sort of fascist environmentalism of the early 20th century. That was very much the concern. What is sort of protect the land for the German people, right? And yeah, that's eerily similar, that rhetoric.
I mean, it doesn't matter what the problems are; they can always find a way of bringing it back to migration. I guess I always
Of
bring it
course.
back to
Yeah.
neoliberalism, so I'm not exactly blameless in this regard. But like, there was a video of there was a thing that someone posted. It was genuinely nightmarish of this huge, like multiple ton dump of waste in Bicester near some river in that Bisters's in Buckinghamshire, right? I forget exactly where it is, but the huge waste dump. And I was like, obviously Thatcherism, people don't care about community. They're atomized. They don't care about the broader effects because it's not part of the market transaction. It's an externality, and neoliberals don't believe in negative externalities, right? This is obviously a Thatcherism problem, and of course the local council have had their block grant slashed, so they can't afford to clean it up. And even if they did try to do it, it'd be through some private subcontractor like Veolia or G4S, who would do a shitty job at anyway. Clear neoliberalism problem. File that for my memory bank of all of the problems of neoliberalism. All the people in the replies go in, it's Muslims. It's people live in third
Yeah.
world countries. This is how they treat their country, and now they're treating our country like this. I'm like, excuse me, do they? Is that actually a thing, or do you just believe that every non-white country is a shithole? Like, it's just it. Like, it's the Trump shithole country stuff.
Yeah.
Because any problem, no matter whether it's economic or social or political, they find a way of bringing it back to why migrants are the issue, the reason why it's an issue.
Also, to the extent that some poorer countries are full of trash, it's our trash. Do you know what I mean? Like it's been sent to them, right? So it's our fault still.
Yeah, like the Atacama Desert, full of like dumped fast fashion in like
Yeah.
the poor areas of Chile, and like that's a shithole country. I'm like, that's America. That's the United States dumping its shit onto
Yeah,
South America.
yeah, literally, and like on beaches in like I think um maybe Ghana, but I might be misspeaking. But I just like all of you see these videos, right? And it's just it's just like H&M clothes and just stuff like that, just all washed up. So it's like you really can't blame the people in those countries. It's just ridiculous. But I don't, maybe we're trying to make too much sense of something that is fundamentally just
No, exactly.
nonsensical.
They want to find a scapegoat to blame. They're already negatively polarized against migrants, so they will find a way. They'll find a way to shove the square peg into the round hole.
So I mean I started by thinking I was going to interview you. Now I feel like I'm kind of interviewing you on behalf of the Green Party. So I guess
So I mean,
you don't have to
perfectly
represent
reasonable.
them. But like I'm just interested in the policies because I wanted to ask you about a few economic policies, and I suppose I could equally ask, what is the Greens policy on this? Because you've got quite a lot of insight. But we were talking about central banks and inflation targeting, and I'm sure you get asked this a lot because I get asked it all the time on the internet. But is the Green Party, how do they feel about kind of modern monetary theory and that side of things? Is that something that's like in the thinking of your policies?
It's not policy prescription, but there are certainly a lot of MMTers within the Green
Yeah.
Party because it's the left thing to be pro MMT. And we had an economics panel at conference which had one person who I believe was from LSE who was very pro MMT, but then we
Oh,
also had the person who wrote the Green New Deal original
and
thing.
Pettifor.
I forgot. Anne Pettifor was there. We had Faisal Sheen and James Medway. So and they were all kind of anti-MMT. So there's a kind of split, I guess, in terms of the thinking. But I was going to be speaking with Sheridan Cates at some point in the future, and the people from the MMT podcast, because Sheridan Cates was our candidate in Islington North at the last election, and she's big on policy, and
Is
they're
that
very
Corbyn's
pro getting the green.
constituency?
Yeah, yeah, you can see her
Okay.
clapping in the background when he gets
Okay.
announced the winner. It's quite cute. But she's very set on making MMT part of the Greens policy framework. So it's floating around. I mean, broadly, I think we're still in a kind of Keynesian framework in terms of where our policy is at the moment, but it's growing in terms of salience. I mean, as for where I stand, I think the MMT prescription about how money works is basically correct. I don't have any disagreements with the
Hmm,
MMT
sure.
understanding of money creation and taxation.
Same.
I just think that when it comes down to the policy, when it comes to actual policy prescriptions that come out of it, loads of people think that this means you can have free money forever, which is not true. I think a lot of MMT discourse is clouded by the fact that it comes from Kelton and Mosler, who are American, and so they have the understanding of the dollar as being the world's reserve currency. So they don't have to care about currency value as much as we do. And whilst I certainly believe that the real constraint is inflation and not can you sell bonds to the bond market, there is another controlling factor of currency value, which is basically the reason why we sell bonds. It's the reason why we are engaging in quantitative tightening at the Bank of England at the moment. Obviously, I think it's too heavy and they should stop. But it's this currency value metric that I think MMT is just forget about when it comes to especially the pound or the pound sterling rather than the dollar. So I think that there's plenty of room to be more expansionary. I think
Mm,
that the fiscal rules that we have, not only are they silly because a bunch of their projections on how much money they can borrow is based upon whatever the OBR say, who get everything wrong all the time, rather than set a policy and then tweak it as the results come in, you know? But in terms of changing our policy prescription to BMMC, it's probably on the later base, I guess.
I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of MMT that's right, and I've always considered myself like a post-Keynesian economist, and MMT kind of sprung out of post-Keynesian economics, but it's a bit more macro and a bit more policy oriented, I guess, and it's been more politically successful. Post-Keynesian economics is maybe a little bit more academic, but like anyway, I agree. Yeah, completely on the money. I don't know about some of the specific policies. I don't know if I like a job guarantee as a policy, and I also sometimes I don't know how it follows from MMT. I feel like MMT is like it, but I don't know if it's necessarily follows from the other principles. But one other thing, and this kind of goes to what you were saying. Sometimes I feel like we don't need to do the whole MMT thing to advocate for like more investment and more government spending. Do you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm just like you just invest in like the infrastructure, health, education, children. Like I said, that you know what I mean, research and development, right? Like these things are good for everybody, and often you'll find that you know they have multiplier effects, and they like might even pay for themselves in the long term. But like they're generally just a really good thing, like both socially and for the economy. And so I'm quite happy just to advocate that without getting into what I think it can be this kind of slightly pedantic debate about, you know, the government issues its own money, and then in accounting terms, it turns out that actually the spending precedes the taxation, and like, oh yeah, you do need to worry about deficits, but only if inflation is high. And it's like, okay, you can have that. Don't get me wrong, that's fine, like in the background. But yeah, I don't think like you need to put MMT front and center to just be like an advocate of more spending on public services, on like a more active state, and like a lot of the other policies that we advocate for.
Exactly, I agree, and I think kind of historically the OBR have underrated the economic benefits of all of those kinds of investments, which is why since the Osborne era, which we're still in, like the OBR is a George Osborne invention.
Yes.
Rachel Reeves sticking to the lines of the OBR means that she is engaging in Osborneism, even if she doesn't want to. That's a real problem. And so we are still underinvesting. I mean, even if you just take a Keynesian perspective, right? Like, and you forget Rachel Reeves' fiscal rule about only spending on OPEX what you're gaining in tax receipts, right? You take, for example, the NHS. Even if you were spending on NHS OPEX to increase capacity, because it's not just CAPEX, it's also OPEX that's going to do that in terms of spending on doctors and nurses, for example.
Yeah.
That is realizing and activating a real resource by getting the 40% of people who are on NHS waiting lists who are counted as on incapacity at the moment, getting them off those waiting lists and back into work. That is mobilizing a real resource that will pay back dividends even through OPEX spending. Under the current fiscal framework, which is very kind of like traditional Keynesianism rather than more of what we're talking about, that is restraining what Rachel Reeves can spend on something that is mobilizing a real resource in the real economy because of this constriction being around only spending what you're spending in tax receipts on OPEX, right? So we could be spending way more on the NHS, right? Doing a Rwanda like they were doing in
Yeah.
the 90s, on like spending like huge amounts of their GDP on healthcare to get the population healthy, ready to go into the workforce and being as productive as possible. Likewise, I think the same is true with R&D. That's more kind of CapEx, or there'll be OPEX in there as well. And you can spend on R&D, and that will be something we could use to fix our productivity problem. Like, you know, why again, no one's investing in R&D in the private sector because the asset economy is the infinite money glitch. Again, you don't need, in an economy where financial instruments continue to increase in value and houses continue to increase in value, to put any money into R&D, because you can make loads of money through things that aren't productive. And so if you have the state doing, you know, trying to rebuild what kind of DARPA was doing in during the kind of the Cold War between America and the Soviet Union, to not for military purposes, but to engage in R&D for commercial purposes too, create more productivity in this economy by, you know, again, the basic stuff that productivity is, people in the audience who are watching who don't know, which is you find ways of working that turn the same amount of labor into more stuff, which requires technological investment and R&D. We could see the kind of economic growth that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have as their central mission, even though it's not a real mission, right? Like they could be doing this, but their fiscal framework is far too constrictive and based upon a bunch of nonsense from the OBR that they could not do if they wanted to. But since they've already set that constraint upon themselves needlessly, if they moved away from that, suddenly the bond markets would be jittery. Again, based off
Yeah.
nothing that is rational. No,
Mm.
there's no rationality, But there's just this sense that if the government is chopping and changing, that means they don't know what they're doing, and it's this stability that the bond markets want, this kind of nebulous stability, which they're getting more so than the Conservatives. I will say that is more stable now than it was before,
Sure.
but they would react negatively to a change in that prospectus, which they wouldn't be doing if they didn't have that prospectus in the first place. And they were just reacting to the actual macroeconomic trends that we were seeing. This is why John McDonnell, before the election in 2017, just went to kind of bond buyers and said, look, like this is our plans. This is how we're going to get growth. We're not sticking to the same kind of fiscal framework as the Tories, but don't worry, you will still see a return on your assets. We're going to calm you before the storm happens when we
Yeah.
get into policy, when we get into government, start setting policy, so that you didn't get this same kind of dynamic where the bond markets are controlling government policy and controlling the whole prospectus for government, which is being restricted by whether there's still a chancellor in place or not, because Rachel Reeves might quit after this budget, you know.
God, John McDonnell, don't remind me of what we could have had. It makes me really
Oh, no,
sad.
it's so honestly. I was looking back at the coverage like during the austerity period up to 2017. I'm like, the word liquidity trap doesn't get mentioned at all. No mention of a
Yeah.
liquidity trap at any point in any of the economic kind of documentation during the Osborne and Hammond era. And I'm like, you're supposed to spend money. You're supposed to fiscally expand in a liquidity trap, right? Like when interest rates are zero and
Yeah.
there's some quantitative easing and you're still not seeing growth in the economy, like print money. That's what it's there for. Print some money and spend some money on investment. And that's the basis of the entire Corbyn playbook. Nothing radical, just do what we would do in a liquidity trap if we had any normal government in place. It was treated like we were bringing communism to Britain.
Do you remember the guy who I think was an advisor for Osborne and Cameron's government who basically admitted this recently? Did you see that? I
No?
think it was in the FT. I can't remember his name, but he was one of the chief advisors and architects of austerity. And he was like, yeah, looking back, interest rates they're actually negative in real terms, right? So people were in real terms paying to lend the UK government money for like best part of 10 years, almost up until the pandemic, right? It was like before things
Yep.
went a bit
Yep.
AWOL. And that was just absolutely the time to invest. I mean, this is why I say you don't necessarily need MMT, because it's like there's no need to get into that debate when you're like, no, they're paying us money to invest. So whatever, like we'll take it, right? We'll sell the bonds and take it. It's just utterly ridiculous. And we could have, I mean, there are so many things, right? I don't, if you've ever like seen me talk about this or read stuff I've written or whatever, you might recognize some of these examples, but just like how David Cameron said to cut all the green crap. And in 2013, and he ordered all the civil servants to get rid of like wind and solar subsidies, retrofitting of homes and stuff. And it was like the point was that would save money, which would help people with energy bills, and we couldn't afford all this frivolous green nonsense. And then it turns out that by underinvesting in renewables and by underinvesting in homes, modernizing homes, we've ended up costing, I think, the average household £150 a year in energy bills. This was in 2022 after Russia invaded the Ukraine.
We
And
closed gas storage. We closed gas storage. Like
yes,
it wasn't even just the green crap. Like the rough storage, which we
yes,
closed it.
yeah.
I was just like,
It's all so short-sighted, It's
crazy.
like with the children and the sort of childcare and stuff. I mean, there's this economist, Dan Davies, who he says that every accounting system is basically a mental prison. And I think that's what's happened with the Tories, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. Obviously, it's ideology and politics too. Of course it is. But with people who kind of believe this economic narrative, it's like you're focusing very narrowly on balancing the government's balance sheet. And with Reeves fiscal rules, you've got this, and like it's not just the government's balance sheet, it's a specific part of the government's balance sheet. It's what they deem current spending. But then, like you said, what is current spending? Is spending on healthcare not investment? Spending on R&D children, like, does that not count as investment? And there are all of these things that you could count. And then there's on the asset side of things, right? When they were selling off loads of assets, they were recording that as a gain because they got money for it. But it's like, no, you've just lost an asset, right? And so I think we've just got this hollowed out state, like social state, but also like in terms of other things that the state owned, we like the post office, for instance, right? We've just got this hollowed out, state where we don't really have any assets anymore. We haven't invested properly, and then they're like, why are things so bad? Why are people feeling like they're getting poorer? It's like, well, it's pretty obvious, but they just keep doing the same thing, and it's like we haven't had 15 years of austerity. It's like that's how people are talking. I mean, was watching the news the other day, and they were just talking about disability benefits, and I was like, it was as if we hadn't just been cutting them and putting people with disabilities through the ringer for a really long time, which we have. The conditions on them have tightened. There are more, that there's less being paid out to people. That has been true since austerity started, but we're having this conversation again. It's just like, I think it would be really great, and I have no idea how to do this, but, a way of like communicating that to everybody, right? That's like, no, this is a false economy. And you actually need to think about the government and the country and like what we actually have and what we invest in, instead of just this kind of like narrow accounting, penny pinching type thing that Reeves is doing, which doesn't actually really achieve anything.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be really difficult to get through to that because even now, people still operate in this household budget. I mean, even
Yep.
The Labour Party are talking about government credit cards. It makes me want to literally blow my own brains out when I'm watching it. In Minecraft, of course, Twitch moderators. But I think when you say like the Conservatives were doing this ideologically, like, what's interesting is that Conservative parties on the continent and Europe, they would never do this. Like this idea that this is kind of, as you say, it's so economically nonsensical for anyone who knows like basic economics. Again, like George Osborne has a degree in fucking modern history. And no one goes on about him being unqualified to be chancellor because he's from fucking Eton, a posh school, and
Yeah.
Oxford. But there's this mythology around the Conservative Party in this country that they are somehow fiscally credible. They're the
Yeah.
fiscally credible party of government. And it is like a total inversion of reality. And the history of this country, especially from Thatcher onwards, has been Labour governments clearing up the mess that's been left by Conservative governments. Whether it's the barber boom, whether it is literally everything that Thatcher did when she was in government in every single respect, whether it was Black Wednesday, whether it was austerity, whether it's
Yeah.
Liz Truss, whatever it is, right? Like we just constantly have to watch the Conservative Party govern cynically, govern in the interest of their own voter base to maintain power without the broader interests of the country being looked after. Labour governments coming into government, dealing with these problems, and then getting blamed for them because they're lefties, they don't know about the economy, even though the opposite is true. And I just want to tear my hair out. Like, people still blame Blair and Brown for all of their many faults, of which there are many, for the global financial crisis, which, whilst they
Yeah.
could have done more prudential regulation and didn't because they were in hock to the financial sector as well as Thatcher was, which isn't untrue, they were at least partially to blame. Did they start the financial sector deregulation? It's Thatcher's Big Bang. It was Thatcher that did the deregulation. It was Thatcher that turned us from a productive economy into an asset economy. And people blamed Blair and Brown. Well, obviously, you can blame them for being Thatcherites, but they got blamed for spending too much money, which is the counter-cyclical stimulus, which you're supposed to do when you get a recession. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I spent too much, Labour have ruined the economy. I'm like, they were saving the economy. They
Yeah.
were saving the economy by spending all of that money. And it's just bought into this long-term narrative that for some reason the left are bad at the economy, which just isn't true. The right are the ones who don't know how economics works, and they never have done in this country. At least not
You know,
since, like Macmillan and Eden, I guess.
yeah, and like, of course, Osborne was calling for more financial deregulation in as late as 2006. I remember that. Before the financial crisis, he was calling for more financial deregulation, and he also missed his deficit targets by like 2 years, I think, because like austerity doesn't necessarily work on its own terms. So I think it's like we think that because we're suffering it's good for the economy or something. There's like this, I don't know if it's like a Protestant thing, but we've got
Oh,
this like,
100%, yeah.
if we're like, we've got to be tightening our belts, and that's what economics is, and like that's a good economy when everyone's suffering. And any good times must necessarily be paid for, through penance. That's how it feels, I think, and I don't know enough about like the culture behind that to comment too much on it, but it does just feel like there's this really really Protestant ethic at the heart of it, where we just think that we have to suffer and that suffering is somehow going to be good for us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This has been such a huge part of conservative kind of groupthink forever. And like no matter how reasonable conservative voters sound when you speak to them, like they just have normal concerns like normal people do, the conservative member base and the politicians are like so right wing. They're incredibly right wing and incredibly bought into this kind of Protestant work ethic, kind of Christian stuff. And I think, yeah, I think that's a really good kind of
Is it
intuition
okay?
that you've done there about what they're like.
Are you talking about like the what are they called, like the 1912 group, or is that what they're called,
1922
the
committee.
1922? Sorry, yeah, like that. So they're like quite Christian fundamentalists almost.
I mean, not even necessarily fundamentalist, but they even if they're secular, they've still
Yeah,
bought into this kind of this Protestant work ethic
right,
stuff. And
sure.
like Burkean conservatism, this idea of the natural society and people all being in their place, right? It's why you see conservatives talk about, oh, we've lost one of these technical colleges, we've lost apprenticeships. And we have, and it would be good if they were coming back. But they don't mean for their kids. They don't mean for
Yeah,
their kids at all, right? Like Rupert Lowe will come out and say we need to have all these we need to get people into good apprenticeships, and I don't disagree with this. But they don't mean for their own kids. Like when they say we send too many people to university, they mean we send too many people from the north to university. That's what they mean when they say
mm,
that, right? Like
yeah,
they've bought into this Burkean idea of society being stratified in the way that it should be. It's just so, and naturally, those people happen to be at the top of the hierarchy, are best at the top of the hierarchy, right? It's really self-serving logic that they're engaging in. And you see this from other Tories too, even ones who care about poorer people, like Theresa May or Rory Stewart, right? Who disagree with a lot of the kind of more right wing positions. They still fundamentally have that basis for their conservatism, that is this natural hierarchy.
natural hierarchy. Yeah. Have you ever read Edmund Burke?
I've not known.
It's fucking dreadful. I don't like, so I thought I'd read it because like founder of conservatism and all that, and like wanting to understand the other side. And I don't look, maybe I'm sure there are some people in chat who've read it and have more insight than I do, but it's just him ranting about how upset he is that the natural order in his eyes has been destroyed by the French Revolution. Like, it is literally just him saying, how dare you? How dare you attack the king? The king is at the top of society. How dare you attack our old? And it's like 600 pages long. And I couldn't get anything substantive out of it that was more than just that. It was just, he just thought those categories were right and natural, and he was really, really, really angry that the peasants had dared to revolt. And like, I guess that is just, you can see that in like a lot of modern Tories, can't you? Like that is just fundamentally what they believe.
A lot of historical Tory. I mean, she's been part of kind of the Tory base for ages and ages and ages, and no wonder that young people are turning away from this fucking dross. You know, like even if the policy was even geared towards young people, the fact that they kind of hold the kind of metropolitan progressivism in such disdain, not even on
Yeah.
grounds of the fact that they have like a some kind of utilitarian opposition to it. It feels wrong because we're very anti-hierarchical here on the left, right? That's the biggest kind of thing that they hate about it, because it upends what they perceive to be like this natural order, which isn't even natural to begin with, because it's all artifice, it's all manufactured, But it's just they always have this idea that things will that the natural order will create itself, and then a change to that must therefore be radical. It's really myopic, really really myopic.
Is
Also,
there
speaking
a
actually,
way?
this
Yeah.
oh, go for it. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
So, I mean, speaking of like the kind of new society that we're getting, this kind of breakdown in class as well, and the Burkeans getting
Mm,
angry because things aren't as just so as they used to be. Here's no, like you interested if you like kind of the polling encyclopedia stuff. Here's another like kind of graph of voting intention I thought was crazy, right? Like obviously I think social grade as a metric when you look at society is a bad thing. I don't think that it captures real class breakdowns because the economic nature of it is kind of broken down in a service economy. But let's just assume that it's correct for one moment. If you plot ABC1 and C2DE together, and then you plot voting intention, are you likely to vote Conservative or likely to vote left or right wing by age, the lines are on top of each other. There is no class disparity in voting intention anymore, broadly, if you look at it by aggregate. So if you're the age is a way, way, way bigger determining factor on how people vote nowadays than their socioeconomic background, which is wild to me. It's absolutely wild to me that you can just plot these things together between like some of the like between A class people and
Yeah.
people on like welfare, and they're basically the same in terms of these cohorts. Really weird kind of distortion where people kept saying, oh, well, people get more Tory as they age. I mean, no, people get more Tory as they generate wealth, and just the wealth disparity is so big now. The level of what you have, which the level at which you have things to conserve, has deteriorated so much in terms of the age breakdown that the class you're born into is just not even a determining factor now in terms of how people vote. Wild stuff.
That is really insane, and it does. What I was going to ask you was about reform and whether they can kind of capitalize on this, because I was wondering if the Tories are maybe a bit stolid and the sort of old fashioned, even if there's obviously massive overlap between the policies of the two. Do you think that reform, and especially Farage with his persona, which I think is fairly trendy, and he's quite big on TikTok and social media. Like, is there a way that they can kind of undercut that? The reliance of the Tories on older parties. Do you think that they can kind of appeal to younger people better, or are they just still
Yes,
the
I think they
same?
can appeal. I think they can appeal better, certainly. But I think that there will be an issue to which that sunlight becomes a disinfectant for them, which is that when it
Mm,
stops becoming just about social media, right? Like it's no longer Nigel Farage saying "hock to it" on that bussy as it claps on Cameo or whatever, and suddenly people get down to grips with what the reality of their policy is, and we're already seeing the drop off, right? Like actually,
yeah,
when I'm looking at the crosstabs now, voting intention for reform amongst young people is lower now, at least slightly, from since when Nigel Farage was open and saying young people need to have a lower minimum wage. I think he's
yeah,
realised that if you look at the voting intention polls, his voter base skews older. This young reform voter stuff hasn't materialised in the way that I think they expected it would do, in the same way that it has for other countries in Europe, for Chega and Vox and the Sweden Democrats and AFD or whatever. That hasn't materialised, and they're kind of pivoting towards pandering towards older voters again. But it's just I think that I think that they will have better cut through. I mean, they're better communicators. Even though I actually think that you look at there are some people who are, especially Tory converts to reform, like Danny Kruger, who are these kind of Burkean hierarchical conservatives. But you look at Zia Yusuf, you look at Nigel Farage, you look at Richard Tice, they are like dogged, dyed in the wool neoliberals of the 21st century. They actually don't have they have certain social beliefs, they're very kind of Christian in their beliefs, but that is second to their like this crazy kind of dogmatic belief in free markets and Thatcherism and neoliberalism, and there's not just kind of reduction in state spending, but the absolute demolition of state
mm,
capacity. Like they wanted like 150 billion pounds a year of cuts or something like that, which is mental, totally mental in terms of what it would do to the fabric of society. They want to slash taxes for businesses, for corporations. They really want us to become like the Singapore on Thames style economy that the Brexiteers really wanted us to become. Like they want to get rid of the EU, not because they want to be protectionist, but because they want to be ultra free trade. They want to be
yeah.
ultra low regulation, right? Like the EU is not regulatory enough for me, and it was too regulatory for those kind of people, you know.
Mm, mm. Can I
And then
ask
maybe
you
I think it's, and I think do I just addendum? I
one
think
more?
that
Yeah,
that
yeah.
free market
Carry
stuff
on.
will not cut through with young people, and that's when I
Yes,
think that
yeah.
people will see reform as not really for them, because we do want more. So like broadly in this society, we do want more state intervention.
Yeah, and it's such a fundamental part of society. I mean, obviously, you and I both want to see more, right? But I think, agree or disagree with it, it's an extremely unpragmatic position just to think that you can just withdraw all of these policies and all of these programs, because it's just going to cause like serious problems. I mean, I know people who've worked in the government, and they've said to me that like they do sometimes have to explain to some of these free market zealots that like you can't do that because people will actually die. When they're like, oh, just cut this and cut that, and they're like, no, 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 that will lead to actual starvation. Do you understand like what you don't understand what you're doing? And I think it sounds like that's just the extreme version of that, and you'd be looking at like an actual sort of catastrophe, right? An
But
utter
Dickensian.
social catastrophe. Yeah.
It'll be Dickensian in its results, yeah. But again, these people, I mean, that's a lot. Most Thatcherites, they just don't understand macro policy. Like that's the thing. Like, especially if they're the finance bro types, like they're really hyped up on like microeconomics, understanding this stuff from like a business perspective. You talk to them about macro policy for 5 seconds, and you realize they are completely clueless and they haven't got a clue what they're talking about. And these finance bros, oh, they're so up their own arse about it. If you got me into government, run it like a business, I would solve all the problems immediately. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
just do not know what you're talking about. It's like whilst Nigel Farage is probably correct in saying we spend too much on paying off interest on bonds held by the Bank of England. I think he's right in saying that. But if we just got rid of that immediately, like what would that do to savers? A lot of reform voters are savers. They want to be middle class, Thatcherites of today, like the aspirational middle class types. And if their saving rate drops to zero because the Bank of England isn't paying off reserves on these things, then they would not like that one bit. That would really harm them economically. But Nigel Farage is doing whatever he thinks he wants to do to try and make sure that he can have his Goldilocks prime ministership, which will cut everything but affect nobody negatively.
Yeah, it is worth emphasizing. I mean, during the election, I read their it wasn't a manifesto, was it? What did they call it? The
Contract
reform,
with the
a
people.
contract with the people, and like there was like one page on each issue, and it was just so weak. I mean, nothing was thought out. I remember doing some back of the envelope calculations, just being like, "This doesn't make sense." Like I read it on stream, and it really is completely incoherent. And they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. And I mean, you see it. There's lots of little fallings out, and there's lots of gaffes and stuff coming from them. So I guess we can only hope that just continues and worsens so that people realize like how incompetent they are.
I mean, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, again, the more they talk about their actual policy prescriptions, the more people seem to not be very happy. Like the cutting minimum wage for young people stuff. Again, like a bunch of boomers love that shit. It's like, oh, young people, they do need to learn how to work hard or whatever it is, even though we're working harder than we've ever worked, But and every older generation has always thought the younger generations haven't worked hard. Like you can go back and find quotes of that kind of
Oh, like
thing.
ancient Greece. Like you can go back to like as far as you like.
Yeah, 100%, right. But the I don't think that when they actually win people over, it will be because of their economic policy, and they will push people away. Well, they may actually do what a bunch of other parties have been able to do, which is win people over on economic policy by osmosis, right? You say we're going to do all this anti-migrant draconian shit, and then people will change their opinions because the party they like, say, like a bunch of shit libs, a bunch of liberal, like kind of capital L liberal types who voted for the Labour Party at the last election, affluent liberal types who are socially progressive but fiscally Thatcherite, who are now angry about Labour taxing private schools and putting costs on businesses with their raising of national insurance on employers. They've all been I saw a bunch of them just won over on Shabana Mahmood's like really draconian asylum policy. They would have, if the Tories had proposed it, they would have said it was terrible. It was awful, right? But because it's not the Tories doing it, they have been slightly moved over in that direction. Maybe reform can do that too with their economic policy. I'm not sure, but it does seem difficult given that I don't think this country has ever really been economically right wing, at least not in the last 30 years.
Mm. Yeah, it is amazing when you look at like what people actually want versus like the people versus what happens, and you're like, this is completely out of whack. A lot of
Oh
people
yeah,
are
100%.
kind of progressive on the council. Like taxing the wealthy is a good example, right? Like most people just think that the wealthy should pay more tax. Like most people want to address climate change. Most people are happy to fund the NHS, for instance. And it's just like incredible how our economic policy has completely departed from that for such a long time. But I just think it goes back to there just haven't been any candidates. There hasn't been the option really And the only time I guess there was with Corbyn and McDonnell, but that was, they were obviously attacked relentlessly by the media, so and
And the
by
thing
the
is,
existing
they didn't have a
parties.
well. They didn't really have any wealth taxes though, really. Like their biggest
No,
taxation policy was increasing on the top 5% of earners, which is just another income tax rise. Like it's more on top of working people. And I think that actually, whilst I would like to see tax bands go up for these kind of demographics, I think that a really big tax increase on those people could see could not capital brain drain. We could see brain drain. I think it's unlikely, but I think there's
mm,
a risk there because we actually have a very progressive tax system in this country where people below median wage pay way less tax than they do in this country than they do in other countries, which I think has engendered this kind of low tax mindset amongst
mm,
people because they pay low tax, they see shitty public services, and they go, well, why should I pay more if public services are going to be shit? Like I don't trust the
yeah,
government to spend this money well because they've not spent what little money they have well, and so uh, wanting to raise taxes broadly is difficult unless you focus it at the rich. And I think that high earners probably do get taxed enough, which is why I support capital gains tax increases and wealth taxes and a completely overhauling council tax so that
yeah.
these £1 million houses in the southeast get taxed at the rate they should be rather than their value in 1991 or whatever.
Maybe replacing it with a land tax or something like that. I feel like that would
Exactly,
be
yeah.
a good thing to do.
The council tax needs to be totally revamped. Maybe folding national insurance into income tax because it's basically just another income tax
Yeah, that's
anyway.
stupid.
Like, yeah,
Yeah,
there's so many things that we could do. But yeah, in terms of the policy prescriptions and people being wanting more spending and less tax, wanting more migrants, but migrants to fill job vacancies. People don't know what they're talking about when they answer polls, and anyone like Morgan McSweeney who follows like issues polling relentlessly doesn't realize that these things can change overnight. Like you look at the digital ID polling, there was kind of broader kind of tepid public support for digital ID. Keir Starmer announces it, he's negatively polarized anything that he touches, and immediately like huge opposition to digital ID because it's Keir Starmer doing it. People's opinions on these things change on a whim, and just
that's true.
following the dial of public issues polling is it's a real hide into nothing if you want to like people will oppose pylons in their area, they will oppose building new estates or whatever, they'll grab their placards and protest new development. And the new development will happen, if I can forget about it 2 years down the line. Just build the stuff, do the stuff, make the changes. If it's good, people will like you, and if it's bad, people will hate you. Like it's the reality of what happens in the policy at the end of the term that matters, not do people hate this now, which I think is a really short-sighted way for policy.
It's called leadership, isn't it? It's quite a novel idea, and it also goes back to what you were saying about the markets as well, where you're just like worry, oh, we can't do this because the markets say we can't do. You know what I mean? Like based on conventional wisdom, it's like no, put forward a clear vision, say you're going to follow it through. Yeah, have meetings with all the relevant people, try to understand like where bondholders are coming from. Of course, that's fine, but like you can't just be scared of doing anything based on whatever, like you said, maybe some polling or just like whatever the general zeitgeist is around what you're allowed to do, these fiscal rules. It's like as soon as you change your strategy and have a clear strategy that's more aggressive, more expansionary, and stick to it, right? Then people will get in line. Like that is what will happen. It's just so I want to say frustrating, but it's like it's actually quite exhausting and quite mentally taxing just to have watched this for so long in our politics, to just have watched this complete lack of leadership and any lack of any vision, right? And I think that's one thing that is just really good about Zach Polanski, but also Zoran Mamdani as well. Like when you see that, oh right, they actually have like a clear plan and they want to put it into action, and it's just like it's actually quite exciting.
Yep, 100%, 100%. And
Mm,
it's why, for those same reasons about having a plan, having a vision, having beliefs and ideology and sticking to it and advocating for it. Like, even within the Labour Party, if you look at the internal polling, two most popular members of Parliament for Labour, Ed Miliband and Angela Rayner, like two people, Angela Rayner
yeah.
wants more workers' rights, believes more workers' rights. Like, she campaigned very hard for it. Like, that's why she was in the position she's in, because she was part of the revamp of workers' rights that was passed as policy at the National Policy Forum. Ed Miliband cares about green energy. Like he was asked to move from the energy department, the DSENZ, DESNZ, at the last cabinet reshuffle, and he put his foot down and said, "I refuse to move. I refuse. I have this vision that I want to put into place." And so the Labour members love him. They love him and they love Angela,
Yeah.
and they hate everybody else because the rest of them are all just money-minded machine people who have no vision, no beliefs, no nothing other than just being the person with the ministerial red box. And it's so obvious to everyone how empty it is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask you about one final thing, which is actually the main thing I wanted to ask you about, but I forgot.
Go for it, go for it. I mean,
Net
I'm putting a plus.
zero.
Like, you can keep going as long as you want.
Oh no, I have to go to play
Okay.
football in about well soon. But yeah,
Okay.
I mean I could talk to you for ages, but I'm sure we'll talk again. But this I really want to ask you about net zero because I've been seeing quite a lot of backlash against it recently. I've been seeing people kind of saying it's what's costing the UK economy growth, and I've seen criticisms of it, and I'm sure there are some fair criticisms of it out there, like just as a specific policy. But I don't. What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, the biggest thing that's causing the increase in prices of energy, it's gas prices, right? We use marginal cost pricing. We've privatized everything, so we very little ways of overhauling that other than changing the pricing model to be like regional or whatever. We are totally in hock to these kind of things because I don't know if you watched Tom Nicholas's video about the energy market post privatization, which is that
Yes.
we have so much gas power because of the fact that it was cheap startup when we privatized British gas, right? So we're over reliant on this stuff to like the nth degree. You compare it to France reliant on nuclear, and we've got
Mm.
Norway reliant on hydro, right? We're kind of uniquely reliant on gas in the way that loads of countries just aren't. And we aren't getting enough investment from the state to build the extra capacity to increase the supply, to drop the price. We're not doing. We're still seeing surcharges being taken off people's bills to pay for the privatized grids and our privatized suppliers, which doesn't need to happen. This could be done by the state at a better rate and with better utility in terms of expanding the grid. Grid expansion is terrible because the private company doesn't care about investing. The government has to force them to do it. It's a whole mess because
Yeah.
of a load of different factors. And the idea that somehow we're making ourselves poorer by wanting to buy into the cheapest form of electricity, which is renewables, it's just the fossil fuel lobbying. Now we will see a point where fossil fuel prices will be in such little demand because of the transition that they will drop and be a lower price, and we'll see more of those kind of anti-net zero voices come to the
Yeah.
fore. But a lot of it is just people, they want to find a reason to blame energy bills being so high. And people who are in hock to privatization, like Reform UK, who are the big
Mm.
anti-net zero party, will try and find any scapegoat other than the reality, which is that private profit is the real problem here, or privatization causing us to have the pricing model that we have. And this privatization model and lack of public investment is causing negative externalities as well, right? Like, so the Danish state-owned energy company Ørsted were supposed to invest millions and millions and millions into one of the biggest wind farms we'd seen off the coast of East Anglia, like one of these offshore wind farms. And they pulled their investment because they couldn't see ROI on it, like not enough ROI potentially in the long run when you took materials and labor costs into account. And it was offshore, so it's more expensive than onshore. At least that's coming back under Labour. And people were saying, "Oh, it's because the green energy isn't good enough." I'm like, "Well, it's because the energy is too cheap. The energy is too cheap to do this. They can't see them returning a profit because it's the Danish state that's interested for
Yeah.
us, for them to get profit for their people. If we had our own state doing this kind of stuff, we'd be have cheap energy which
Yeah.
we could sell to ourselves at cost and bring like the price down. But because we over privatize and we're stuck on the marginal price, it doesn't matter how cheap the government can produce electricity or how cheap anyone else can produce electricity, because we're all just going to pay what the marginal gas price is, and we need to decouple that and have more like state involvement and state investment. At the very least, even if we kept all of the structure the same, we didn't just nationalize producers overnight, but just had this big kind of state apparatus to create profits for energy or locally owned power, like municipal power, which you could use to reduce bills elsewhere, or you could use to subsidize energy bills, then there wouldn't be too much of an issue here. But we're just in this big mess, as you say, because of underinvestment in the transition under the Conservative Party and over privatization. People are finding something to blame instead, and it's really frustrating. As the only people who stand to gain from a net zero U-turn are the shareholders at Centrica.
Yeah. It makes me think of China, because when people say that net zero is going to cost us loads, because they just like invested so much in solar energy in particular, and just like completely revolutionized the sector. And like they're in a big way responsible for like the fact that renewables are now so cheap that they're cheaper than fossil fuels, right? And it's like they just led the world economically and politically on that, and it's just had so many positive knock-on effects. I mean, it's a good example of the type of thing Mariana Mazzucato talks about, right? To bring the conversation full circle. But it seems like people who are against net zero are stuck in this very like, small c conservative world where it's like, well, this is the way things are. So if we do this, that's going to increase costs. It's like, no, you can invest and create something which is like much, much better than what we have now and move to an entirely different way of doing things. And there's no reason that investing in renewable energy or, environmental initiatives in general has to be worse for, economically, it has to be worse for
Exactly.
consumers. It seems
Like
completely incorrect to me.
like two of the biggest economic inflection points in this country's history that aren't the GFC were both oil shocks in the 70s and
Mm.
in the pandemic, right? Like, and like, if that should be the biggest argument for divestment from fossil fuels, and people just
Yeah.
like, they're so myopic. And even then, like, these politicians that are driving this mostly, when you actually look at the opinion polls, net zero, majority support, climate change policy, majority support, people still like this
Yeah.
stuff. Reform voters aren't even that skeptical or not as skeptical as the politicians are. And it just feels like vested interests a lot of the time for me. And these are good jobs. This is the kind of industrial policy that we need to bring jobs back to these disadvantaged areas. It's what's so fucking stupid about Trump cancelling a bunch of Inflation Reduction Act funding that was industrial policy funding into the green economy. Biden kept the tariffs, as you pointed out in your video about this stuff as well, to make sure the American jobs were protected. It was industrial investment for jobs in a bunch of red states, in red constituencies, like Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia's 14th, got loads of IRA funding for green jobs. And Trump comes in and goes, we're going to cut all of that industrial policy investment that's creating these good jobs for like the construction sector that is which has been maligned for so long, and the American men feel like they want more masculine jobs, and that's what a bunch of this tariff policy
Yeah.
was supposed to be about, bringing back the masculine jobs in the production sector. I'm like, well, you've tariffed a bunch of natural resources rather than finished products, making it harder to produce in your country.
Yeah.
You've gotten rid of the industrial policy, which is half the whole point of protectionism, is having industrial policy to back up the industries that you're protecting. But of course, Scott Besant and these people are doing these things for geopolitical reasons, not for macroeconomic reasons.
Yeah.
And if we cut those same funds in this country, all those jobs in the green economy that we could go into, that we could put into all of these ravaged communities in the northeast and in Cumbria or whatever it is, and these left behind areas, that will all go. If we get Nigel Farage's Thatcherite dream, all the communities that vote reform will get even worse. They'll get even fewer jobs, even less investment, and we'll see even more money pouring into the cities, which is where neoliberalism has directed all funding for the last 46 years.
I did always think of the Biden administration's policies as a bit of a model, and it did seem like Labour were going to imitate them at one point. But like, it is just, I don't know. I mean, what is the reason that Trump is doing what he's doing? Is it just to hurt like other countries and just like, I don't know, just like
Yeah,
throw his weight around? Is it that simple, or
it's a
is it?
geopolitical negotiating tool. That's all.
Yeah.
It's all it's been from the start. There's a really great video by Huri Shasfoot from Money and
Yes.
Macro, talking about like Scott Bessant's master plan of reshaping the global economy using tariffs to do that, creating like
Yeah.
vassal states, periphery states, and enemy states, and then using tariff policy to redirect kind of global interest back round to the American axis against a Chinese axis, and to kind of manufacture a bipolar world again, where they want to create enemies and friends in the way that we had during the Cold War. This is it's really interesting. I think fundamentally it will fail because all they're doing is creating the American century of humiliation by making sure that their economy falls off a fucking cliff, you know. But it's clear
Yeah.
that it's been working to get people to countries to come to heel and geopolitical blocs to come to heel, because when we could have had a real kind of axis of resistance to it with Canada and the EU and the UK and other countries kind of coalescing around an aggressive policy against Besant's plan. Instead, we got people capitulating and Keir Starmer picking up Trump's paper like a little cockboy. That's the
Yeah, I
reality of
know.
what we've had. Is the kind of people who support like globalization in the good sense, not like obviously globalization that's exported all manufacturing to sweatshops in Bangladesh is bad globalization, but a kind of good kind of geopolitical cooperation, which we've seen from the EU and Canada and countries in like South America, whatever. Like we could have had that maintained and treat America like the enemy trying to break down the good thing that we created. And instead, when okay, Daddy Trump, we will do what you want. I mean, Mark Rutte even called him Daddy. Like this is how pathetically cucked we are to America.
I mean, it is. I was about to say, none have capitulated more than us, right? I mean, I do see the negative future for the UK would be as basically an American vassal state. I think like that process began before Trump, and even before 2008. I think if you think about like Blair and Bush, and like Iraq, and you think about the sort of expansion of American corporations into our society. I think there are a lot of things that have made us more Americanized, but like Brexit was obviously a big shift. And like yeah, I really, really worry about that if we're basically just a sort of fucking colony of the USA.
Oh yeah, and it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible that all of the self-proclaimed patriots of Reform UK
Yeah.
claim to be the ones to want to put Britain first or the interest of. No, you want to put American mega corporations at the center of your policy. You geopolitically, I mean, they were literally Nigel Farage was in the House of Representatives being questioned about like free speech or whatever, saying, I believe that America should use trade policy and inflict economic sanctions essentially on the UK to try and get us to change our policy on free speech or whatever, because of Graham Linehan being arrested for tweets or some shit. Like, that's how much these people genuinely want our country to be owned by America. Not only do they want our local economies to be taken over by American mega corporations, they want our local businesses to be bought out by American private equity firms. They also want the American state to control us geopolitically to the point at which they're happy to watch him tariff us to try and get us to change laws. He's very happy for us to have trading regimes that are profitable for America and not us to maintain the special relationship. And they're happy for Trump to sue the BBC to take billions of
Mm.
pounds of license payers' money, essentially. I don't think it'll be successful, but they want it to happen purely on the grounds of the fact that their brain is hardwired by American culture war talking point brain fog from like they talk about DEI, which doesn't exist in this country. They talk about everything through the realm of a
Yeah.
bunch of American cultural topics that aren't relevant
Woke.
here. It's not relevant to talk about like woke politics or like Black Lives Matter or whatever's happening in terms
Univ-
of in
So I
yeah,
was going
like
to say
exactly.
the campus speech crisis, and all that kind of like the no
Yeah,
platform, all
exactly.
came from the US, and people act like it's sort of happening here. It's just crazy. We've imported all of their culture war narratives, and I just don't think that the UK experience with all of these things, it's just not the same. It's pretty wacky to me. But one thing I will say is that I do think that most people in the UK do kind of hate America. Um, like so that I mean that's something I always think that it's kind of difficult to get people to talk about capitalism, partly because they think you're a socialist, but partly also because most people just don't think about capitalism. They just don't really use that word that much, right? But like if you start talking about like American companies or something like that, they'll be like, oh yeah, they're fuckers, they're evil, you know what I mean? It's crazy over there. They don't have healthcare, blah blah blah. I think most British people are kind of on that wavelength. So it's like I don't know. I'm not saying that we necessarily should foment aggressive anti-American sentiment to win, but I don't know. It could be used, maybe. It could be used,
I
maybe.
mean, I'm fully behind like de-Yankification politics at this point,
The
right? We
Yankification,
should go
yeah.
like because not only do we not like American kind of economic stuff, we also hate cultural American stuff. Like we find Americans like overbearing, we find them gauche. Like that's a really kind of central part of British culture is
Unsubtle.
being kind of reserved and, as you say, subtle and a bit
Sure,
kind of
yeah.
self-deprecating and sarcastic and bombastic American like tourists are like we detest them, those kind of people in this country. They really kind of break through that kind of kind of old-fashioned British reservism, which I absolutely subscribe to, even though
Yeah.
my job is not doing that. But like, yeah, I think we could really take a leaf out of Ed Davies' book, I think, in this regard. He's the only kind of politician who's really going full anti-American at this point. Very weakly, I think. He could be
Mm.
going stronger on this, but I think we need to be really key in terms of attacking Reform UK. The big thing that is shared between the opinions of Green voters and the opinions of Reform voters are skepticism towards big business. And if you tie like
Yeah.
the Trump presidency, American big business into what Reform UK stand for, I think that's a much stronger argument against them than talking about how their asylum policies are bad, talking about how their economic policies are bad, but people will ignore you. But saying that they're American cultural import, they want us to cuck out to Trump, they want to essentially
Yeah.
get rid of our political sovereignty and become entirely beholden to America as a unipole, and they want to allow American megacorporations to subsume our economy. I think that's a really strong argument against them because it cuts into two things that reform voters really care about, which is skepticism of big business and patriotism.
Yeah. I completely agree. I do think it's a worthwhile angle. I mean, I don't know. I'm really bad at politics and like being politically appealing because I just always talk about like the graphs in like economics papers and stuff. But like, it strikes me that that is a good angle. Is it
Yeah, I agree.
is
I
it
was going
something you
to say
might
as
see
well,
in the
like,
Greens?
I mean, I hope so, and I think it's a really good way of talking about like localism as well. That whilst the people on
Yeah.
the conservative cultural right, they talk about the UK. Have you ever seen this? YOOKAY is this idea that multiculturalism has destroyed British culture because it's become too ethnic or whatever. It's a real kind of racist shit, right? But one thing they talk about in terms of that is like, oh, there's chicken shops everywhere, and I'm like, first of all, how dare you talk down on Morley's? Fuck you. Like
Yeah,
chicken
yeah.
shops.
Hands
If
off
there's
my
anything
Morleys.
that's good, literally, I love me some fried chicken. But if we actually look at these are local businesses set up by citizens of this country who care about the community and are giving something back. The real rot in terms of destruction of British culture on our high streets is again, it's just American slop. I can
Yeah.
walk down one street in Nottingham and walk past McDonald's, KFC, Jollibee, Popeyes, Wendy's. It's genuine, like crazy, just how much of our local culture has been subsumed by American capitalism, become identical slop nonsense that no one can feel cultural connection to. When I feel plenty of cultural connection to families who've been here for generations, setting up their own little takeaway.
Yeah.
Everyone loves everyone knows what it's like getting a kebab from the boss man. That's not an experience you get ordering from your little electronic till at McDonald's.
Yeah. It reminds me of when Bart's walking through that shopping mall and every single shop is a Starbucks. Do you remember that? Um,
A
yeah.
Simpsons reference for everything.
Yeah, there is a Simpsons reference for everything. They predicted everything. Um,
For me, there's a Peep Show reference for everything. I always quote Peep Show.
oh yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think Peep Show's like up there for me as well. It's like I think I do prefer the UK office, with the caveat that obviously Ricky Gervais is a complete twat, but like
It's
his
fine.
that
I mean, Ricky Gervais's quality is entirely proportionate to how much of it's written by Stephen Merchant.
oh yeah,
That's how it
totally.
works, right? His stand-up shows
Yeah.
they are like dross. They're so bad. But he's a readable actor, and he gets Stephen Merchant to write all of his jokes.
The funny thing about him is, I mean, obviously, when the character of David Brent is a bit like him, right, and that's why he can do it. Like he probably recognized at the time that he's a bit like that, but he's turned into like David Brent more and more as he's got older. And if you see him now, like he's one of those people where his subreddit has turned on him. Like, have you been like Dave Rubin's, Joe Rogan's? They all hate them. Ricky Gervais's subreddit has basically turned on him as well. But they're always just highlighting how he is now just David Brent. And he's just like really, really lacking in self-awareness, right? And there's like scenes from The Office where they like it's just predicts his behavior now. It's yeah, it's great. I love going on the
I think that
subreddits where people
I
hate
think
the
what we've
person it's
seen,
about.
yeah, I think a lot of this is because Whereas the American new atheists have become very kind of socially reactionary. It's not really happened in the same way in the UK. The secularism and atheism is much bigger in this country, and it's a bigger part,
Yeah.
especially our culture and our generation. And so, whilst a lot of people would have liked Ricky Gervais being an edgy atheist in the early 2000s, we've all grown up to be social progressives, and he's become this giant fucking reactionary. In the same way, like Bill Maher has too. Like, I don't know why any
Mm.
Bill Maher's exactly the same. Like, he tried to imply that somehow the Democrats were being taken over by Maoists. His brain is total mush nowadays. Bill Maher is, and I think he's the same kind of direction as Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, yeah. That I think that's true. I mean, you got Richard Dawkins here. He was never quite as much on board with like imperialism as like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, I think. But he turned into just an absolute like wanker. Like it was just crazy. But I just think it's like Marx said, didn't he? He said about you've got to combine your rejection of religion with like liberation for people. Otherwise,
Exactly.
it's just going to end up being reactionary.
When again, you look at Richard Dawkins, what does he talk about? American culture war shit, right? Like
Yeah.
his audience is an online American one now, and that's why I think why it's interesting when you look at the Tories kind of failing politically in this country is that lots of people are really Twitter brained. Kemi Badenoch is really, really Twitter brained, right?
Mm.
And she will talk about things that are popular on Twitter as if they're popular to real life. And I'm like, no, no one cares about the Chagos Islands deal. Why are you talking about this in Prime Minister's questions? There's a cost of living crisis. Keep up. But of course, she doesn't have a cost of living crisis because she's married to a very rich man and was she was so wealthy when she was working at the Spectator. She refused maternity leave because she didn't need it. That's how wealthy she was, right?
Oh my
And so yeah, of
God.
course she cares about. Of course there's a great story in the New Statesman about how she will just trying to shut herself in her car and just scroll the internet and social media to like decompress or some shit, just filling her mind with like Twitter brain rot.
Literally, yeah. Those same videos that I mentioned earlier, where it's like, "This is London today." Like, just that's what Kemi Badenoch is looking at. Like, this is where we are.
I mean, yeah, like she in her original video as pitch for Conservative Party leader, she said this genuine phrase, "I will be a leader who's not scared of Doctor Who or whatever." And I'm like, what
No.
is
Oh
this?
God. Just our political class, honestly, like it's just insane what it's done. I mean, I always think with Twitter how you know it's destroyed the brain of the man who owns it, right? It's like owning it doesn't help. Being the richest man in the world doesn't help. Like it will just destroy your brain. And he has literally gone completely insane, and his entire perspective of everything is just warped. Is there any? Because people were talking about the decline of Twitter at one point. Is that has it sort of flattened out? And now sort of
Yeah,
some
I think
people have
most
left for blue sky and but that's sort of
I think that's
plateaued.
basically right. Yeah, it's the I find Twitter usable because I have an extension that blocks anyone who pays for Twitter. So all of the
Ah,
weirdo like crypto bros and Elon sycophants who give him their $15 whatever it is a month to get themselves at top of replies, not present in my feed at all. And it also means that they can't quote tweet me to increase my salience of my posts in their feeds.
yeah,
So my Twitter ecosystem is completely different to everybody else's, right? But I
right.
think we have seen it kind of plateau off. But broadly, people I think will just slowly move away as it becomes a Nazi bar, like which is basically what it is now. You can't just post anything without slews of groypers in the replies of things.
Well, the right are splitting, aren't they? I've seen this. The right are splitting now. So you've seen like the sort of more reactionary centrist side departing from the actually what is now an overtly Nazi side. Yeah, I think you've seen that open up a little bit from my. I spend limited time on Twitter, but I just saw that, and now you see like who the proper Nazis are, and then just the people who enabled them, but are now realizing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, Donald Trump was asked about Nick Fuentes, like, I don't know who this guy is, and I never heard of him, don't know much about him. He invited him to the fucking White House last year, like, not last year, earlier on this year, sorry. Of
Uh,
course he knows who Fuentes is,
yeah,
the
yeah.
intra-party war. I mean, it's all interesting. A lot of the conservative backlash in America's over Israel now, like, which is again very surprising. Not something I ever would have expected. But turns out there are lots of anti-Semites amongst the American far right.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like it's like anti-Israel, but it's because you're actually anti-Semitic, and then you're like, oh,
Mm.
Jesus Christ. So we're sort of splitting into the fascists who are overtly anti-Jew, and then the fascists who believe that they're pro-Jew, right? And it's like those are the two
I
factions,
mean,
and it's just like fucking
they're
hell.
not yeah. They're not even necessarily pro-Jew. They're just pro-Israel in a lot of
Well,
cases,
they
right?
believe they
Because
are, yeah.
oh yeah, I mean, this is I mean, they believe in they're Christian nationalist Zionists who believe that there needs to be
Mm,
a return of Jews to Israel to satisfy some condition from the Bible or whatever it is. But also a lot of them are just like the Anthony Balfour, sorry, the it's about whether about James Balfour, whatever his name was, I forget, the Balfour
yeah,
Declaration
yeah,
guy,
yeah, yeah,
who where the Arthur Balfour, that's the one, Arthur Balfour, who did the Balfour Declaration because he wanted Jews out of Britain.
yeah,
That's the reason why the Balfour Declaration exists, because they're nationalists who believe that every single country in the world should be mono-ethnic, monocultural. Every single ethnicity has their own bit of land that belongs to them, and the return of Jews to Israel is fundamentally a way of ethnically cleansing them out of America, and a way
yeah.
of ensuring that they create a model ethno-state that they can base their white ethno-state on in the United States, right? The same is true for plenty of kind of like right-wing anti-Semitic Zionists, so far as that they love Israel because it's a militaristic ethno-state that
Yes.
protects its borders and has this very strong ethnic component that Western states don't really have anymore in terms of their own ethnic background.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know that much about this, but that was my understanding. Was that it was basically kind of, Zionism was basically a way of removing Jewish people from like the West, right? Because it was like the whole West
Exactly.
was, I say it was extremely anti-Semitic at the time, right? Now it's still anti-Semitic, but like maybe less so than in the 30s. I don't know for the time being, but like, yeah, it wasn't born out of like a love of Jewish people, by no means.
Yeah, it's why I mean it's why I think you see a lot of pushing, kind of instinctively, of this idea that the left and Muslims are anti-Semitic from people, not because they genuinely believe it or because they're trying to do it instinctively or they're trying to do it deliberately, but there's this instinctive idea that, well, we need to ensure that people think that anti-Semitism is a Muslim thing, it's an Eastern thing, it's a political radical thing, rather than the mainstream Western political thought for centuries and centuries, right? Like
Mm,
Muslims and Jews lived
yeah,
alongside each other in the Middle East and in Asia for centuries and centuries, as sharing people of the book, which is how Muslims have historically described Jewish people, right?
yeah,
Until the foundation of the state of Israel, and that's where this kind of big kind of tension came between these communities. And like you see lots of ethnic diversity, like in Syria with Alawites and Kurds and whatever it is, and other places around the world that you don't see in Europe, because in Europe they all got genocided, right? Like we've just
yeah,
done pogroms and genocides in century after century after century in Europe. That,
yeah.
well, whilst there has been similar things happening in other parts of the world, it's not been as much of a problem outside of kind of the Christian center of kind of Europe.
Oh, that's really, oh, yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. Yeah. I'm gonna have to cut this
Yeah,
off, by the
yeah.
way, because I do need to go. I have a football match. But it's just so interesting. I mean, I feel like we could carry on talking for ages, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe we could have a little chat again after the budget and see what happens. I didn't ask you
That sounds
to.
like the budget debrief. Yeah.
The budget debrief, yeah. I didn't ask you to make any predictions because I don't like it when people ask me to make predictions because I just don't know what's going to happen. But like,
Well,
but,
they keep like trailing and railing and kind of rolling the pitch for a bunch of different changes and then seeing how it goes. So it could be fucking anything at this point. Who knows?
yeah, yeah. But anyway, yeah. Thanks so much for joining me, and yeah, I guess we'll probably talk again.
No worries. Everyone in my chat, make sure you go and follow Unlearning Economics, which you just search
Likewise.
again, it's on YouTube's to find the channel and become a member. But on both, I think on both our channels, membership is
Yeah,
only 99p. It's
yeah,
cheaper than a can
yeah.
of Red Stripe. So yeah,
99p, 99p becomes so yeah. No Justice, aka Helena, has Twitch and YouTube, and you're also very active on TikTok as well.
I am on
So yeah,
every single platform. I'm just
on
at
every
No Justice MTG. It's
follow
very
her on every
very easy to
platform,
find me. Yeah,
basically.
but yeah, absolutely, yes, not a problem. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute
Cheers.
pleasure, and I look forward to
Yeah, it's been
hopefully
great.
talking again after the budget.
See you.